Well, good morning and welcome to our coverage of this morning's Liberal leadership spill here at Parliament House in Canberra. In half an hour, Liberal MPs and senators will file into their party room to decide whether to stick with Sussan Ley or turn to Angus Taylor. The party of Menzies is at its lowest ebb, no doubt about it, and torn over which direction to pursue. So this morning, Angus Taylor is widely expected to be given the chance to turn those fortunes around. His supporters are confident, and even the Sussan Ley camp privately concedes the party's first female leader is behind in the count heading into this meeting. That's the shot of the corridor outside the party room meeting, where soon we will see MPs and senators file in. Always interesting to see who they walk in with, what groupings we see entering this decision on the future of the party. We'll bring you the outcome, of course, as soon as we get word from our sources inside the party room. I'm joined by Patricia Karvelas here in this Parliament House studio, Jane Norman outside the party room, and we're also joined by Annabelle Crabb. And we have our colleagues Mel Clark, Jacob Grieber, Claire Armstrong, all lined up to join us as this leadership contest unfolds. PK, first to you. It's pretty hard to find anyone in the Sussan Ley camp sounding confident last night or this morning. Where do you think the numbers currently sit? No, in fact, it's consistent. All of Sussan Ley's supporters have told me privately, and some have gone public with this, so it's hardly a big reveal that they are behind. They are certain they're behind. So they're not even really talking up their numbers. It's about the extent, though. I think they... a respectable vote. Yeah, their view is that Angus Taylor is a couple of votes ahead. However, some of Angus Taylor's supporters are claiming they're as far as 10 votes ahead. And if you look at those who have made public comments, David, even the fact that Senator James McGrath, who was a Sussan Ley supporter and really stood by her, made that decision public yesterday to resign from the front bench and to make it clear that he supports change. I think that demonstrates that the Angus Taylor campaign internally has been successful in the last few days. The votes have broken his way, and that's exactly what he wanted, of course. That was not always a fait accompli. At the beginning of the week, it was looking closer. Angus Taylor, of course, was not as actively agitating for the leadership as someone like Andrew Hastie, who was really very much the person who was behind the push to oust Sussan Ley. But it seems now that Angus Taylor, as the Conservatives' favourite candidate, they ended up going with him. The Conservatives have all locked in behind him, so even those who are a bit concerned about change have locked in behind him, and he's peeled off enough moderate votes to win the leadership today. To the Liberal source who is just calling me, we're on air now, so please send a text, and we will. Texts are better right now, thank you. Point. And we'll be obviously keen to get any news from inside the party room once it starts in half an hour. To all those Liberals watching, just let us know the news as it develops. Jane Norman's outside the party room meeting for us this morning. Jane, worth spelling out how this process is going to work, because before there's a head-to-head vote between Taylor and Sussan Ley, there has to be the vote on whether to spill the leadership.
That's right, Spears. There's about 3 votes to take place today. So the first, of course, is the spill. We understand that is going to be moved by the 2 Conservative Liberals who actually called for the spill formally yesterday. That is Phil Thompson and Jess Collins. They will stand up and call for this spill motion. Aaron Violi, the whip, will then follow through, and MPs and senators will vote. So there are 51 MPs and senators in the Liberal Party room. 26 votes is needed for any of these motions to succeed. And basically, if the spill motion succeeds, it's the end of Sussan Ley. No leader has really gone on to win a leadership spill after that motion succeeds.
And that one might be tighter, Jane, than the actual leadership vote. If the spill succeeds, then you might see a bigger tide move towards Angus Taylor.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's worth remembering, sort of 9 months ago, Sussan Ley only won the leadership by 4 votes. Since then, 3 of the people who voted for her have left the parliament because their terms ended in the Senate, plus Giselle Capterian, who of course was at the time the candidate we thought was going to be winning Bradfield, although she ended up losing. And so the numbers were very tight then, they remain tight now. And if you speak to both sides, there's about 20 locked on Conservatives, 20 locked on moderates, and that leaves about 11 votes in the middle. The people that both sides have been wooing are the newbies, people like Tom Venning, And then there's the kind of centrists, people like Dean Smith. And so what we are getting word of overnight is basically those MPs are moving to the Taylor camp, and that is what is giving the Taylor camp a lot of confidence going into this meeting today. But of course, if the spill motion does succeed, then the candidates will nominate themselves. And we are expecting at this stage still, Sussan Ley will fight this. So it looks like it'll be a Sussan Ley, Angus Taylor head-to-head.
She ain't stepping aside. That's been clear, and that's what we will see today. There was some talk this morning, I think, that if it's an overwhelming vote for the spill, maybe she doesn't run. But that's not the mail that we're hearing, that she's going to fight this. Annabelle Crabb, let me bring you in here as we keep an eye on the corridor outside the party room meeting there. Important, I guess, to ask the question, what is this about? What's this whole decision for the Liberal Party really about?
That is kind of the only question, and there's not a super clear answer to it. It's a really, really unusual leadership challenge, I think, on a couple of counts. One, I think public interest in it is at just an extreme all-time low. I saw a Sky News poll online on the night that Angus Taylor visited Sussan Ley and asking for opinions from readers and viewers on who would be best to lead the party. And I think the figures were 15% for Andrew Hastie, who's not a candidate, 10% for Sussan Ley, and 8% for Angus Taylor, and 60% who didn't have a view. Now, do you know what it takes for a Sky News participant not to have a view on something? I mean, things have got to be pretty extreme for that to happen. And I think that kind of gives you an idea of the lack of kind of specific stakes involved in this leadership challenge, because they are, the Liberal Party, in this extraordinary pinch point at the moment in terms of their history and what's happening on the broad right of politics in this country. They're losing, hemorrhaging, in fact, support to One Nation, and the way that those voters kind of respond is often through culture war sort of issues. And they're also losing, over the last two elections, this extraordinary slice of metropolitan heartland seats to the grouping that we loosely call the Teals. Now, the big question, the only question is, what does a leader of the Liberal Party, which has been around for 80 years and in government for about 50 of them, do to pick a path through those two groups?
I mean, now, Annabelle, that's the question. I mean, they all know that's the problem, bleeding support on the left and the right. Angus Taylor has talked about restoring our way of life, which, you know, in the pitch that he's made, which I suppose is a nod to the cultural conservatives, lifting our standard of living. Everyone wants that. But is it clear from Angus Taylor, or is it clear from Sussan Ley what they plan to do to solve this great conundrum of losing all this support on both sides?
No, it isn't. And I think the most we've heard from Angus Taylor is sort of broadly that he'd just be better at it. And his supporters and his public statements are all about bringing everybody together and cutting through and being a better communicator and solving this conundrum. But I sort of don't know how, and I don't know what his plan is. And the issue for Angus Taylor, I think, is that, I mean, if, as we all seem increasingly to accept, he's the most likely person to walk out of that room today as the leader of the Liberal Party, every first move that he makes will be read through that lens, you know, who he puts on his front bench, whether he includes culture warriors from the far right, and what effect that will have on the votes that they're trying to win back in metropolitan Australia.
Just on that, Annabelle, I was talking to someone who's not voting for him a few minutes before he came on air, and he said the problem he's going to have immediately is that he's promised to have 13 people the Treasury and 14 people the Foreign Ministry. I don't know if that's true, but the point was that he's made a lot of promises. He's going to have to squeeze a lot of his supporters into the front bench.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of like the no theatre of reshuffles, right? You kind of express your views and intentions through the language of who you put, you know, where. And that will be the most obvious set of tea leaves to read. Yeah. That and, you know, a press conference that he's likely to give if he wanders out with whichever deputy materialises. There seems to be a bit of last-minute scrambling about that.
Let's talk about that, PK, the deputy contest, because here it is a more uncertain outcome here. He takes notes up. All right, talk us through the declared candidates, the maybe candidates, who's sitting where on the deputy race.
So Dan Tehan is a Victorian regional MP on the front bench. He's nominating.
Declared candidate.
Dan Tehan.
Yep.
Jane Hume, who is a Victorian senator and was a key member of Peter Dutton's economic team with Angus Taylor. She's a progressive. She's, you know, in the moderate wing of the party. However, she's almost had a difficult relationship with the moderates since the last election.
Because
Sussan Ley dumped her from the front bench.
Because she backed Angus Taylor so strongly after the election for the leadership.
That is not why she was entirely, I think, dumped. I take issue with that as an argument.
I mean, there were also the campaign mistakes.
Yeah, the campaign mistakes were key.
Chinese spies.
What was unfair about that, though, in Jane Hume's mind, that she's told her colleagues, is there was a collective, you know, that whole campaign was a hot mess, and so blaming Jane Hume seemed unfair. So that's Jane Hume. The read I had on Jane Hume putting her hand up is that actually, unusually, even though she's a moderate, the right of the party were all likely to lock in behind her, most of them.
Well, most of them are saying, we need to have a woman. If we're getting rid of Sussan Ley, you're going to need to have a woman. Is it as simple as that? I mean,
I don't think it's only that, although that is a very big issue. You do not... Yeah,
sorry, Aaron Violi, he's the party whip holding the folder there heading in. He's got the responsibility of running this whole show this morning, going through the mechanics of opening, announcing that there's a motion to have a spill of the leadership, conducting the ballot on the spill of the leadership, then calling for, if that's successful, calling for nominations for the leadership, then conducting the secret ballot on the leadership, then getting to the deputy leadership, asking for candidates there, going through an exhaustive ballot, various rounds if there are various candidates, until we have a deputy leader of the Liberal Party as well. Then we will see him emerge from the party room to announce the outcome. We will hopefully know the outcome before he does that, but he's got a busy job this morning. Sorry, just to point that out.
Well, it's a great thing to point out. Yes, we will try and find out from our contacts in the party room as soon as that vote happens, who's won, hopefully, the votes, and we'll bring that to you as it happens.
Back to the deputies. There's Michaelia Cash backing Angus Taylor.
Leading Conservative from Western Australia.
And Senate Leader for the Liberal Party, and that's a position she will want to retain and hasn't quit from, because that's elected by the party. She did quit the shadow ministry yesterday afternoon when declaring that she's supporting Angus Taylor. Just on the deputies, though, sorry, Dan Tehan, you mentioned Jane Hume. What about Ted O'Brien, the existing deputy?
Well, he wants to put his hand up.
He's still a good shot, isn't he?
I think he's a good shot because the moderates are likely to support him, especially because, as I tried to explain, Jane Hume actually has a difficult relationship with her own, you know, I don't know if I should call it a faction, it's looser than that, but with her own tendency in the Liberal Party. So yes, Ted O'Brien is the current deputy. My read of this, based on the many conversations I've had, is that Angus Taylor is unlikely to want him to be his shadow treasurer. And so that's complicated. If you do win the deputy leadership, you do have a bit of power on what you would like to do. That's a bit complicated.
What is he, shadow treasurer?
Well, he's offered it to he's talked to a few people about it.
That's the point I was making earlier. He's talked to a few people about it.
Now, it's also worth mentioning that, so there's some of the candidates that will put their hands up. Melissa Price has publicly said she will. I'm not sure if she'll end up...
She has said on 7:30 last night, there's Andrew Wallace going in, the shadow Attorney General. She has said that if Sussan Ley loses her job and they then get to the deputy question, she will then decide whether to put her hand up. Anyway.
Okay, so there's some of the options. Yeah, but either way, when you talk about what Angus Taylor is likely to do, what I can say is that he does plan to bring Andrew Hastie back onto his front bench. That is all but certain now. That was his internal inside the right leadership rival. So Andrew Hastie to come back. And I do think actually Jacinta Dubber Price is also likely to be brought back to his front bench as well. She decided not to run for the deputy role. Remember, she originally ran on that joint ticket with Angus Taylor. They were...
It'd be a shock if he didn't bring her back.
He will.
He's got to make room, though. To bring all these people back means dumping others. Jane Norman, let me come back to you outside the party room down there. Look, so far we've seen a few trickle in, coming in solo. No sort of group arrivals that we saw was at the Net Zero party room meeting where famously the Conservative collective walked in together. and emerged victorious. It'll be interesting to see who Sussan Ley walks in with, if anyone, and Angus Taylor. Who does he surround himself with, or does he walk in solo as well? They're always interesting visual moments, aren't they, in a party room ballot like this, to see what sort of image they want to present.
Yeah, they sure are. Like, is it kind of a show of force going into this from the Conservatives saying, we've got the numbers, this show is all over? And it's right to go back to that really stark image of the gang of Conservatives walking into the net zero party room. I've got the photo on my phone. You've got Angus Taylor, Andrew Hastie, Sarah Henderson, Jess Collins, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. So yes, these are all the figures that you can expect to be elevated to the front bench if indeed Angus Taylor prevails in this leadership contest. For Sussan Ley, it will be very interesting to see who she actually does walk in with, because Ted O'Brien is obviously still figuring out behind the scenes whether he is going to be, well, he wants to sort of nominate for the lead for the deputy, but her support base is sort of diminishing. But you can expect that the moderates who have stood by her this whole time, Melissa Price, Maria Kovacic, Andrew Bragg, they have all been her most forceful defenders, but they are now finding themselves sort of on the wrong side of this leadership ballot.
Let me go to Annabelle, just back on that deputy question. Someone in the party who knows how to count numbers says it is an uncertain race, but it's a three-way race. Jane Hume, Dan T and Ted O'Brien, the three we were just talking about. So right now, as they head in, it's a little uncertain who is going to emerge as the winner there. Annabelle, what do you think about these various options, Jane Hume, Dan T and Ted O'Brien? And I guess, how much does the deputy leader matter?
Well, a fair bit. I mean, as the long and patient service of Julie Bishop demonstrates,
under various leaders,
there's a fairly big requirement on a deputy to be able to hold a straight face and also to get around and be the eyes and ears of the leader.
There's Tim Wilson, Annabelle, coming
room.
In solo. Someone who has been talked about as a potential third candidate. That's not going to happen this morning, but someone who no doubt has longer-term aspirations.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think that it's a hallmark of this, how can I put this politely, not spectacularly well organised insurrection, that even late last night and this morning there was a lot of confusion about who was running and who wasn't, a bit of panicking, particularly among the moderates who, as Jane said, worried that they're a bit out in the cold. There's, I guess, a bit of concern about any of the groupings that might emerge from this. So, for instance, an Angus Taylor, Jane Hume pair-up is kind of weirdly similar to what the culprits of the last election defeat might look like in the
well, just on that, I mean, it's a good point,
review.
right? Labor will have a field day, because they'll say this was the economic team, the gurus who brought you higher deficits and opposed tax cuts and so on, and work from home problems and all of that. So they'll have a lot of fun. And the party review, which we still haven't seen.
The only certain outcome here is that the Labor Party is going to have a lovely day.
That's true.
That is the only 100% guaranteed
There's
outcome.
also the party review that hasn't been released yet for reasons including, as PK revealed, the prospect of legal challenge from Peter Dutton. But that's going to be focused, you would think, too, on Angus Taylor and Jane Hume in part.
Look, I think that that's a reasonable bet, and my God, I don't know. Like, if you were Sussan Ley, it'd be very tempting to just dump that and table it and then go on holiday, wouldn't it? I don't know. Anyway, I'm sure that won't happen because, as she's demonstrated in the last few months, she is able to put up with a whole lot of unreasonable nonsense. So then there's the outcome that it's an Angus Taylor, Dan Tehan situation, and look, that is obviously two dudes of the right emerging as the leader and deputy.
Two dudes of the right.
Two dudes of the right. It's called the mini-me solution. It's sort of that ignites a bit of alarm across some members of the party towards the moderate wing. And then there's the Ted O'Brien situation, which is, I guess, I don't know. I mean,
we'll see.
Ted O'Brien.
And PK Ted O'Brien. I mean, he's 9 months only as Shadow Treasurer and Deputy Leader. Look, he's been solid, but hasn't exactly, created a lot of trouble for Labor and for Jim Chalmers.
Let's be clear. Has anybody in the opposition set the world on fire in the last 9 months? Has anyone actually made their mark
There's
and
Melissa
been
Price
able
we were
to
talking about earlier.
challenge.
What about in the previous term as well, when Angus Taylor was the Shadow Treasurer? He talked a lot about the need to tighten the belt, to have some spending restraint, to stop all these band-aid solutions. But then when we came to the crunch of the election campaign, what was their plan?
Well,
it was high deficits.
It was higher deficits, and it was also increasing taxes, remember, saying no to Labor's tax cut, which was very controversial. Look, this is the narrative that I think Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, if she's successful, remember, they were the economic team under Peter Dutton. Now, there has been, and I've heard it from everyone, because I've been working on these things very intensely, there is a massive blame game that goes on that issue. The Jane Hume, Angus Taylor economic vision, they argue they had many ideas and many proposals that were ignored by Peter Dutton.
So this was all Peter Dutton's fault?
They argued that his office was part of the problem. I'm just talking about the narratives here. Peter Dutton believes he was not supported well by his frontbenchers. And if you look at sort of the performance, I do think Peter Dutton was out there alone a lot, right? So I think that proxy war will keep continuing and will haunt Angus Taylor, because one of the arguments that's been mounted by his critics inside his own party is that he didn't actually land any big blows when it comes to the economy, even though we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, right? So a blame game on that issue, but ultimately I think it's a collective responsibility. You know, if you'd think that a party room could have stood up to Peter Dutton and said, this is economic, Armageddon, what are you doing? We've got to sort this out. I didn't see that happen myself. Did you?
They sound like a happy lot, don't they?
I think they are. Can I give, some they are in a wicked position. Oh, this is an interesting shot. We've got here...
Group of Taylor backers.
This is James McGrath in the middle, isn't it?
No, Ben Small.
Oh, it's Ben Small. OK. And it's also Garth Hamilton. Now, he's the tall man. He's a member for Groom. He is very close to Andrew Hastie, was very much supporting Andrew Hastie, but he's a leading Conservative, increasingly active, and he's now swung his support behind.
Yeah, and Scott Buchholz from Queensland, he's made clear he's sticking with the leader, Sussan Ley, walking in solo there this morning. But look, this question about the deputy position, look, perhaps flippantly suggested earlier, it may not matter too much. I don't know if many voters pay attention to who is the deputy leader of, well, any party. But when you're making a change like this, and if the party is to dump its first female leader, this does become a really valid question about how you stand up as the leader and deputy and the sort of image you want to present to the voters you're trying to win back. And, yes, there are problems clearly with the campaign, and Labor will have a lot of ammunition to use against if it's a Taylor-Jane Hume ticket. But to have two blokes stand up in this moment after Sussan Ley is deposed, if that's what's about to happen, that really is important.
It's huge. If they have two blokes that come out as the sort of leadership team of the federal Liberal Party, when they have been smashed in the cities, and when we know, based on public polling and then the real poll, the election, that women abandon the Liberal Party in droves, that's insane. I mean, really, they will find that very hard to sell to the public.
So the late mail, as MPs are now filing into this party room meeting now, just 6 or 7 minutes away from commencing. The late mail we're getting, our colleagues Claire Armstrong and Jake Evans. There's Andrew Hastie walking in with John O'Duniam, his key supporter. The Tasmanian is stuck with the West Australian throughout this. They're backing Angus Taylor, but famously held that meeting a couple of weeks ago to decide that Andrew Hastie should sit this one out.
They're housemates.
Jane Hume, we've been talking a lot about, is walking in there, slightly ahead of two Conservatives behind her in Sarah Henderson and Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. Jane Hume will be going for the deputy position. And there's Aaron Violi, we mentioned on the right earlier, the party whip. So the late mail from our colleagues Claire Armstrong and Jake Evans, who are hitting the phones, both sides are expecting a margin in favour of Angus Taylor of around about 9 votes. It could even be more. So he may end up with a 30 to 20 vote win over Sussan Ley, is what is being expected by both the Sussan Ley and Angus Taylor camps. So there's not much doubt about where this is heading. First hurdle, though, will be that spill motion, and how many are going to vote for that? then it's possible that we see an even bigger margin vote in favour of Angus Taylor over Sussan Ley.
And we understand that James Patterson, who is a key supporter, of course, of Angus Taylor and has been instrumental here from the Conservative wing, walked in there through the back as well.
Dan Tehan running for the deputy position, heading in looking relaxed, but I would say they're saying it's a three-way race for the deputy's position. I don't know if he would be the favourite, though, at this point. It depends, though, in this deputy's race. Moderates, as we were discussing earlier, aren't thrilled with Jane Hume, so that block she cannot count on. So where do those moderate votes go for the deputy leader? Do they stick with Ted O'Brien, or do they go with Dan Tehan? That's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, and I think the optics around gender will be in their minds. Although I think it's fair, that's Melissa McIntosh. She's the member for Lindsay. She's on the front bench as well. She's been talked about in the leadership race as well. She's been making it clear that she has ultimate ambitions to be leader, and I think it's fair to say there's been a frustration too from some of the dwindling numbers of women in the Liberal Party room, that it is a show which is very focused on men as candidates, especially with Sussan Ley going. Is that Alex Antic?
It's Alex Antic. Let's bring in Jane Norman, who is outside the party room watching all of this unfold as well at the moment. Jane, just give us your perspective down there of the various groups that are walking in now.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of MPs walk past solo. I've just seen Dean Smith, Melissa Price, so it doesn't look like there are kind of blocks at this stage. I'll be keeping an eye out to see who Sussan Ley walks in with. Just hearing from, as you're saying, her key backers, no change at the moment to the numbers, so it does look like Angus Taylor has those numbers. And in terms of the three-way race between Dan Tehan, Jane Hume, Ted O'Brien, I think the reason why there's uncertainty is because there could be a field of up to 8. So if Angus Taylor does indeed prevail, well, there could be a few more moderates in the room sort of flagging their future leadership ambitions and wanting to say, well, hang on, actually, this is not a fait accompli. We're going to stand up now to disrupt the votes. There could actually be an exhaustive process of votes for that deputy position, depending on who puts their hand up. We saw Tim Wilson yesterday kind of almost make an audition for himself to take on one of the leadership positions. But the other thing I wanted to just note with this whole idea of change, speaking to moderates yesterday, their big fear is that if indeed Angus Taylor wins, that this idea of the right takeover will mean that nothing changes. And the lesson from the last 2 elections is that the Liberal Party needs to change. It is diminished in its ranks. It's losing women, urban seats, migrant communities. And the fear is that Angus Taylor isn't really talking about any of the things that need to maybe actually happen from here to win back those groups. And of course, the big question is if indeed that election review will ever be released, and the James McGrath review, which is meant to be looking at the Liberal Party's existential crisis and charting a path forward. That is another question to be asked really of Angus Taylor today, if indeed he wins this leadership ballot.
PK?
Well, one of the views of the Conservatives is that actually being more distinctive on some of these culture issues needs to happen. And even though I know that the sort of mainstream view is that they already tried that under Peter Dutton, the view of people like Tony Abbott, who can I say has been really very active in this campaign, pushing for his friend Angus Taylor.
Sorry, there is Angus Taylor.
There he is.
In by himself. Not doing a big walk in front of the cameras, but
he's also got the right door. Remember last time there was the wrong door snafu in the last leadership
James McGrath,
moment.
we talked about, still working the phones up to the last minute. He's the Shadow Minister who quit the Shadow Ministry late yesterday, former Sussan Ley backer, was probably the most significant one to quit the Shadow Ministry. That defection to say that he will back the leadership spill really saw a bit of a eyebrow raise or a jaw drop for many in the Sussan Ley camp, and from that point it really started to become very clear that this was not something they could hold on to, that Angus Taylor was going to prevail in this ballot. So James McGrath, phone still glued to ear, the backroom numbers man and a former campaign director in Queensland, entering the room where he will be backing the leadership spill. And then we'll see where he emerges in terms of any frontbench position under Angus Taylor, should Angus Taylor win this shortly.
Yeah, and to see just how much Angus Taylor does make the decision to punish, moderates who actively campaigned against him. And what I mean by that is people like, I can name them, Andrew Bragg, who's a leading New South Wales moderate, but is in a key portfolio where you really need some traction if you want to be a good opposition, and that's housing. There is nothing more important to people than housing and the housing crisis. Will he be removed, or will they keep him?
I think we're about to see Sussan Ley. People just filing out of her office. Claire Armstrong says she just heard some applause coming from the room. I assume Sussan Ley has just spoken to the team, her staff.
And flanked by women.
Yeah, really difficult moment. And Tim Wilson there as well. Melissa Price, Anne Ruston, who is a very close Sussan Ley backer. They've got big smiles. They know what's about to happen. Yep. We can't forget that this, personally is a very difficult day for any leader going through this. She has fought to the end. She is not making way for Angus Taylor, and her supporters are backing her as they enter the room there. Maria Kovacic, I think, as well. For a ballot that they know they're going to be unsuccessful, Andrew Bragg, we can see Paul Scar as well. So the moderates flanking Sussan Ley as she enters this vote.
Is such a similar picture to the Conservatives on the net zero day, all together in an organised way. Fascinating that they planned the optics around that to show her a lot of support.
Yeah. That's Ted O'Brien, the Deputy Leader. Will he emerge from this room as Deputy Leader? That is still very much an open question. He's gone in solo. He is appealing for votes across the Conservative and moderate and unaligned centre from which he resides to hold on to the Deputy Leadership. But that won't be easy. He'll be facing a contest with Jane Hume and Dan Tehan in particular. But for Sussan Ley, just to come back to that point, and Jane, Norman, I might just bring you in here as well, witnessing that down there outside the room. She would have addressed the staff. This would have been an emotional moment for many of them. We can't forget that people in the Leader's office worked their guts out, really, from day one in the opposition Leader's office. This has been the toughest 9 months for an opposition leader that I can certainly recall, given where this party is at. It really is at its lowest ebb. Alex Hawke going in there as well from the centre grouping too. But for Jane, for Sussan Ley, keeping on that brave face as she walked in with those supporters, just tell us what you made of that moment.
Yeah, Sussan Ley has shown stoicism throughout this whole process. So, it's worth noting she took over the leadership after the Liberal Party, the coalition's worst ever election result. So already she was given basically the worst job in politics, and she's put in place a few steps to try and, reflect on that and put in place, a policy process to bring the party together. But from the start, she's from the moderates. The Conservatives kind of had her on notice, and she's made missteps along the way for sure. But she's also confronted a totally fractured coalition, 2 coalition splits in the space of 9 months. We haven't seen that before. And then all the while she's known that her Conservative rivals have been sort of waiting for their moment to pounce. But I think ultimately what you'll hear from Conservatives is the fact that the opinion polls are in such a dire state that they're totally catastrophic, and that if the party continues along this path, they're facing electoral wipeout. And so that's really what's confronted her. Whether or not she's been given a chance is really an open question. But I think in politics, they look at the raw numbers and think you've had 9 months and things have deteriorated significantly. So as James Paterson said yesterday, and Angus Taylor backer, to change directions, we need to change the leaders. But it will be an incredibly difficult day for her. And I think after this, the big question is whether she actually stays in Parliament. Ms Ley has been in Parliament for decades now. Does she leave? That would trigger a by-election in Farah. And what's fascinating there is it could be an open contest between Liberals, Nationals, even One Nation. So these are all the kind of questions that'll be asked after today.
Yeah, and a big test for Angus Taylor, should he be the leader, having a by-election anyway. We're getting a few steps ahead of where we're at right now. The doors have closed there. It has gone 9 o'clock. It's a few minutes past now. So that leadership spill meeting is now underway, and the first order of business will be whether to actually spill the leadership. Phil Thompson, Jess Collins will formally move that motion. The party whip, Aaron Violi, will be managing all of this. Then they go into a vote on whether to spill the leadership. That's a secret ballot. And if that's successful, as expected it will be, then Aaron Violi will ask for candidates to stand for the leadership. And literally, Angus Taylor and Sussan Ley will stand. They'll take to their feet. They won't give speeches at that point, we expect. But then we go into a secret ballot on which one of them has the support of the room to be the leader. Angus Taylor, as we've been reporting, is widely expected to win that, and possibly by a comfortable margin. Then they'll go into the vote on the ballots on the deputy position. That will be an exhaustive process, so it may take several rounds to knock out the candidates until you're down to 2. So this might be a reason why this meeting drags on a little bit, but hopefully we will be getting the news from inside the room as things progress as to what exactly is happening. This might be a good time to bring in our election analyst, Casey Briggs. Casey, we've been talking a lot about the dilemma that the Liberal Party faces under whoever is going to be leader, bleeding votes to One Nation on the right, having already lost so many seats to the Teals in the city centres. Just give us a bit of well, your thoughts on the conundrum, the difficulty that the party is facing in electoral and polling terms.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite the doozy, isn't it, David? We've got this wedge between the city and the country, between One Nation and the entrenched urban independents and Labor in the cities. And it's put the Liberal Party in a position where it's really struggling to work out what to do with it. And so far, Angus Taylor, if he is the successful leader after this meeting, he hasn't really put on the table anything publicly that would be a departure from the approach. Now, maybe that will come if he's elected, and we'll see what he has to say then. Let's just put our party strategists' hats on, though, for a moment. Let's just think purely in terms of sort of electoral terms. You've got 2 options. It's very difficult to talk out of both sides of your mouth these days, with the way the media market works, with the way information flows, with the social media algorithms. It's not like the 40s and 50s where you could say one thing in the bush and one thing in the city, and those 2 constituencies wouldn't hear what the messages the other was getting. And that is part of the problem that the opposition has at the moment. They've got different constituencies pulling in different directions, wanting different things. Do you tack toward the city, the centre, the moderate seats, where in order to form government you need to win some of those back? But how do you do that when you're currently hemorrhaging support in the bush? You actually also need to stop yourself going backward in regional areas. So let's think through the strategies here. One thing you could do is say, we've got to cauterise this wound that's gaping at the moment in regional Australia. We need to tack to the right. We need to be talking about immigration more, the kinds of issues that One Nation is finding a lot of support in certain parts of the country. It's kind of a rational thing that you might think, well, that might make the most sense at the moment. We cannot handle both of these crises at once. Let's cauterise that wound and then think about how we make some inroads in the city. The thing working against that strategy is the Liberal Party is a political party. Campaigns cost money. Campaigns are expensive things. The Liberal Party is very reliant on donations that largely come from the cities and those moderate seats and business communities who don't really want the Liberal Party talking so much about those kinds of One Nation wheelhouse issues. That's part of the sort of difficulty here is, you know, the Liberal Party is a professional political organisation. It's not like One Nation, which has, you know, made do for a very long time with, you know, true believers, volunteers, and not all that many staff. They've managed to get to this point in that position. But the Liberal Party without MPs and staff, this is not a mass organisation, a mass membership organisation. They kind of have to find a way to maintain the party organisation, the party structure, the resources and the money while fighting these flanks. So yeah, it's a doozy. In some ways, the electorally smart thing to do might be tack to the right, but how do you then pivot if you can, you know, neutralise that issue? How do you then pivot back to actually put yourself in a position to form government? Because the opposition are a long way from that point right now.
Yeah, it's not a cost-free proposal, in other words. And look, it's why James Patterson really yesterday framing this in existential terms. This is change or die. Casey, thank you. We'll come back to you. I want to bring in Fiona Scott, who's a former Liberal MP and current federal Vice President of the party. Good to see you,
Good
Fiona.
morning.
Thanks for joining us. We seem to talk at all these inflection points for the Liberal Party, and there haven't been many happy ones for your party of late. Look, we've been trying to ask or answer this question. Hopefully you can. What is this decision for the Liberal Party today really about? What is it about? When we talk about the direction of the party, how do you see this?
Well, I'm hoping this is rock bottom. I hope this is the bottom and that this is the foundation that the Liberal Party can build back from. I mean, when you see news polls with a 1 at the front of it, there's, you know, there's oblivion or there's rebuilding. And what we need to see from the leadership team that comes out, an ability of bringing everybody together, which has been a very challenging and a Herculean task, is somebody able to be a Menzies 2.0 that, you know, how do you get to 76 seats in the House of Representatives? Menzies did that by bringing together 8 different parties from, you know, the female suffragette movement at the time to people who were military people, small business people, the whole thing. Will this leadership team be able to talk to, you know, people like David Pocock? Will they be able to talk with Pauline Hanson? Will they actually be able to recreate what it is to be a centrist party? And I believe that ideology and I believe that vote base is what the Australian public are crying out for. The vote is still there, but they're not seeing it in the contemporary Liberal Party. This is a big job, whoever wins today, but that is the task in front of them.
Is Angus Taylor a Robert Menzies, as you put it?
Angus definitely has many of the attributes that are going to be needed.
Sorry, just hold that thought. Jane Norman's got some breaking news for us. Jane.
So, well, what I can tell you is that the spill motion is being counted as we speak. So it's pretty efficient. The party room met at 9 o'clock. 9 minutes later, the 2 people we expected, Phil Thompson and Jess Walsh, have put forward this motion and it is being counted as we speak. I'll bring you the numbers as soon as I hear them, but just wanted to let you know that it's happening.
Thank you, Jane. Sorry to interrupt you there, Fiona. You're talking about Angus Taylor and the attributes that you think he may bring. Do you think this is a good idea to make this move?
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Liberal Party overall and, you know, Sussan Ley and various other people have talked about the catastrophic defeat that we saw at the last really 2 elections. And what that means and what's going to be needed is somebody that has the understanding of the business transformation project of that, of finding the infrastructure, what's needed to be done, but then also reach across to these other places. Now, Angus absolutely has the skills when it comes to driving that type of...
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you again.
Yeah.
Jane, the spill vote has succeeded?
The spill motion has succeeded, Spears. I'm hearing from one source in the party room it's succeeded 33 votes to 17, 1 informal vote. So that is a big margin here.
Yeah, I've just received that from, I think, a separate source to yours, so we can confirm 33 votes in favour of the spill, 17 against. I'm actually told there was 1. I'm not sure whether they wrongly filled out the ballot, but 33, 17, 1.
1 informal, yeah.
Okay, 1 informal. All right, so that's important, Jane. Thank you. Just to dwell on that and highlight that, the spill motion, which, as we were saying, was the most difficult one for the Taylor forces, the most difficult hurdle to clear, has been cleared, and really it's been cleared very, very comfortably, 33 to 17. There's no doubt now that Angus Taylor will win the ballot that they'll go into now on the leadership and will win it, it would seem, by a strong margin. PK, let me just get your thoughts on that outcome. That's a bigger margin, I think, in favour of the spill vote than even the Taylor forces were talking about.
Oh, yeah, that's incredible. Look, what happens often, though, if you look at historical precedent, is when there is a big momentum for change and where people make a decision that they need to be emphatic about that change, you see that kind of shift. And that's what's happened in the last 24 hours, in my view. There's been a momentum built around even settling the question. And remember, the spill vote is about settling the question. So an overwhelming view, 33 votes, saying yes to settling and opening the leadership, you know, not shutting the concept down. 17 against. They no doubt the hardcore Sussan Ley backers. The rest think it needs to be settled. Now the vote will, of course, the vote proper for who will become the leader will happen, and that's a different vote to just opening the leadership up, and that's more key. But I think it's all but certain that we will see. Fiona, you watch this closely. We will see an Angus Taylor victory, and perhaps even a significant one. Just give me a sense of how much that actually helps Angus Taylor. He was always worried going into this because it wasn't on his timing that it would be not emphatic enough, and he worried about that. Looks to me like he might get a bigger victory.
Just before you answer that question, sorry, Jane Norman's got a bit more for us. Jane.
All right, so this is all coming out in dribs and drabs, but I figure it's worth telling our viewers what's happening. The only 2 nominations for the leadership are Angus Taylor and Sussan Ley. So this is playing out as we expected, and this vote is happening as we speak.
That's good to point that out, actually, Jane, because there was some thinking or reporting that if it was a big margin in favour of the spill vote, that Sussan Ley may not contest the leadership. But even though it is a big margin, she is contesting. She is putting her hand up, I guess, Fiona, that's a brave move, given the size of that victory for the spill motion.
Yeah, it is. And look, internal source I was talking to yesterday, made the comment that when this happened in New South Wales, that, you know, Mark Speakman did not contest, and it actually allowed the transition to be smoother when there is such a clear sentiment one way or another within the party room.
Yeah, but there is a view from the Sussan Ley camp, which is why she's putting her hand up, that she has been treated dreadfully,
Yeah.
and that she has been undermined in a kind of substantial way that has made it impossible for her to have clear air.
The counting is underway right now, so they've all cast their secret ballots. You've been in this situation before. Just give us a little explanation of how it works. You get the slip of paper, you write
Fill it out.
name.
But then you're sitting next to people.
Do you have to write their surname too?
Yeah, do you have to sort of watch out someone's watching over your shoulder?
I
or-
don't
You just
know
write
how.
Gus for Angus?
I don't know how a federal parliamentarian does an informal vote. I'm still stuck
There's
on this.
one informal vote in the spill. One informal.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
you're either voting for the spill or not for the spill anyway.
Surely you know how to vote by the time you get yourself elected to federal parliament.
Good point. It's a good point.
That's
We'll
the
see if we can
royal
work
commission,
out
isn't it?
whether we ever find out who did that. All right, but right now they've done the vote on the leadership and the counting is underway now. There's 51 ballots to count. What did it take last time? Only 6 or 7 minutes.
Yeah.
So this won't take long before we know. And we expect that it will be Angus Taylor given the result of the spill vote. But yeah, there's no show and tell here, is there? It literally is you write down and try not to let anyone see what you're writing, or are you proud of who you're voting for and keen to show it off?
There's not technically a show and tell, that's correct. But you are sitting in a room next to people and, you know, you can see if you're writing L-E-Y or T-A-Y-L-O-R. And you could always have someone like, oh, you know, like, so, and where you sit on your first day in the party room is where you sit the whole way through. So if
You can't go and sit with the supporters of...
No, see, like you can walk in and that sort of stuff.
But historically, there have been MPs, I mean, I've seen this happen, who have told both candidates they're going to vote for them because they are hedging for their own careers.
What's
Let's
the old
not
line?
forget that.
You only believe the person who's telling you they're not voting for you.
Absolutely, the person who's really upfront. And I think there's a lot of integrity in being quite upfront, which is why you've seen some people take that path, because there's the risk of career punishment. I mean, we saw it with Jane Hume and Sussan Ley. It wasn't entirely about who she was going to vote for, but it was partly probably about.
Yeah.
Annabelle Crabb, let me just come back to you because the scale of that vote in favour of spilling the leadership, I think, has been a bit of a surprise. 33 to 17 and 1 informal, but 33 of the 51 voting to spill the leadership is significant.
Yes, it is, and I would expect that to be reflected in the level of support for Angus Taylor as leader of the Liberal Party. I mean, pending some bizarre outbreak of surprise, I think that's the most likely outcome. And I think, you know, it's difficult to overstate the sort of flat feeling of despair that prevails, you know, across different sectors of the Liberal Party room at the moment. Like this cry that went up yesterday, change or die, I think is probably about the most articulate expression of it. I think this idea, I mean, the idea of conservatism is kind of to avoid change unless it's absolutely necessary. It looks like the Liberal Party is going to install, for the task of radical change, one of the most conservative people in the party room. It's just, it's going to be wild. I don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, Fiona, just to that point, coming back to your thoughts on Angus Taylor from the Conservative side of the party, we know there's problems on both sides, the right and the left of the Liberal Party, that they need to win back. But is Angus Taylor signalling, do you think, in the messaging that we've seen over the last 48 hours, that he does have a plan to reach out to both sides?
Angus Taylor absolutely has a plan to reach out to both sides. He absolutely does. And, you know, you look at the history of between people and relationships and where they get to where they are. I mean, there are people in the...
I've got some breaking news. Angus, 34, Sussan Ley, 17. That's from one source. We have said...
So somebody worked out how to vote.
Yeah,
we have to be clear. Angus, 34 votes to Sussan's 17.
And we're just going to check that we've got two separate sources on that. Okay,
Yeah.
we have that from, I'm just checking that it is from two sources. Okay, so there you go. We've now confirmed that Angus Taylor has won the leadership, 34 votes to 17, and PK, that is an emphatic win. It mirrors largely the vote in favour of the spill motion. It's a bigger win than we were expecting for Angus Taylor. It's a very strong margin, one of the strongest margins, in fact, over recent leadership ballots in the Liberal Party. This will at least give him a bit more authority as leader within the party, the scale of that win.
Angus Taylor, 34 votes to Sussan Ley's 17. That's a thumping win by the standards of, leadership battles. And so Angus Taylor has actually achieved, people have said, it looked a little ham-fisted, this leadership tilt, but he's actually achieved a very substantial win today. And I think that speaks to a party in crisis that feels like they need to change now. There's no going back. And this is a terrible result for Sussan Ley, who will be devastated, I think.
I want to bring in right now, Tony Abbott is joining us, the former Prime Minister and, of course, former Liberal leader. Tony Abbott, thank you very much for joining us. I think you're at an airport right now, so we appreciate you giving us some time. The news has just broken. Angus Taylor has won, and by a healthy margin, 34 votes to 17. All right, the line has frozen there. We'll come back to Tony Abbott once it unfreezes. Jane Norman, outside the party room meeting there, what can you tell us?
Hello, Spearsy. Well, so obviously a huge win there for Angus Taylor. The deputy vote is now happening. There are 4 nominees: Jane Hume, Dan Tehan, Ted O'Brien and Melissa Price. So we knew it was going to be at least 3, but there are now 4 nominees, and they're going through the kind of exhaustive process now to decide who will be the deputy leader. Interesting because they're largely the 4 who had either declared publicly or we sort of knew had been canvassing numbers. So that is certainly a race on. Melissa Price from the moderate side, Dan Tehan more of the Conservative, Ted O'Brien moderate. So sort of a split between the mods and the Conservatives going for that deputy position right now.
Yeah, and that is as expected, and this process could take some time given the exhaustive ballots, given the number of candidates there. But right now, Angus Taylor would be feeling relief, but also encouragement, no doubt, by the scale of that win, PK. For Sussan Ley, that is, well, it's a very disappointing result, ending a disappointing stint as opposition.
Although showing just, and I don't think you'll be surprised by this, but the difficulty of this decision. I have a text message from one moderate who says, it was the most muted and unenthusiastic applause. Now, that's contradictory to the number, but obviously there are mixed feelings about this change.
Tony Abbott is back with us now. The line just froze momentarily, but Tony Abbott, former PM, thank you very much for joining us. The breaking news that Angus Taylor's won the leadership, and by a healthy margin, 34 votes to 17 over Sussan Ley. What's your immediate reaction to that outcome?
Look, 3 points, Spearsy. The first is that he's the best person for the job. Second is that everyone should get behind him because we need to win and be a strong opposition. The Liberal Party remains the best hope of better government in this country. The third point, very important, the next election is winnable. It is winnable. Never forget that oppositions, in a sense, don't win, governments lose. This is a terrible, terrible government. I'd say it's the worst government in many decades. That's why a competent, energetic and united opposition can win the next election.
Tony Abbott, Patricia Karvelas here. I just want to ask you, what will Angus Taylor do differently? He talks about our way of life. Is that about cultural issues? Can you give me a sense of the sort of leadership you think that he will embrace?
Well, he's made 2 points so far. The first is that he wants to restore Australian standard of living. The second is that he wants to protect our way of life. He wants Australia to remain Australian. I think what that means in practical terms is that we will get a much stronger energy policy. We will get a much stronger and clearer immigration policy. We will have much stronger encouragement of national pride and support for national symbols like the flag. And I think that's exactly what we need right now.
And
the alternative government.
Just on that, Tony Abbott, a much stronger and clearer immigration policy. We know One Nation is calling for a much tougher immigration approach, including restricting immigration from incompatible countries, as they put it. Is that the sort of thing, do you think, the Liberal Party should be doing, restricting immigration from incompatible countries?
Well, I certainly think that we've got to get the numbers down really quite drastically. Currently, we've got 400,000 plus coming in every year, absolute all-time records. I think we need to get the numbers down to about 100,000 a year. That was the average of the Howard era. And that means, obviously, weaning educational institutions off the overseas students' cash cow. It also means weaning businesses off reliance on short-term foreign workers. Now, that's not something that can be done overnight, but it is something that has to be done if, as I say, Australia is to stay Australian. Now, I think it is important that we are prepared to distinguish people on the basis of values. I do not want to see discrimination on the basis of race or religion, but I do think that a country has a right to keep its culture. And that's why it's important that everyone coming to Australia for the long term support our values.
Tony Abbott, you've talked about Reform UK, and of course there's the MAGA movement in the US and the need for the Liberal Party to reform. Angus Taylor, however, is sort of the traditional economic rationalist school from Howard and Costello. How does he provide that point of difference that really activates this movement?
Well, as I said, we need a better, stronger energy policy. We need a better, stronger immigration policy. And I think that's absolutely consistent with the Liberal Party of Howard, Costello, Menzies and Abbott. My government was the last government that produced a net overseas migration below 200,000.
Okay.
Certainly in my time, we abolished the carbon tax. We did our best to get the renewable energy target
Tony,
reformed.
I'm going to politely interrupt just to let you know the first round from one source of voting for the deputy. Jane Hume, 20 votes. Ted O'Brien, 16. Melissa Price, 2, and Dan Tehan, 13. So
Melissa Price would drop out.
That's right.
Move into the next round against the remaining 3. Look, Tony Abbott, just before we let you go, thoughts on Sussan Ley? You've been in this situation where a leader is deposed by the party. She's led over the last 9 months, clearly not without mistakes of her own, but it's been a very difficult period, clearly, after the big election defeat. What are your thoughts and messages to Sussan Ley?
Look, I have a lot of respect for Sussan as a person. I think she's a decent, competent person who did her best in a very difficult job at a very difficult time. Look, the nature of politics, your successes are very public, your failures and your defeats are very public. At one level, I bleed for Sussan, but on the other hand, I think it's important that our party and our country move forward, and I do think that required a change of leadership.
Tony Abbott, thank you very much for joining us as this news breaks. We'll let you jump on that plane for now. So, look, let's just recap. Look, a quick, didn't have a lot of room there for fact-checking, but the immigration numbers that Tony Abbott gave of 400,000 is being contested, that this year it's currently only 306,000.
Yeah, but either way, that stronger approach on immigration is a key Conservative demand, if you like, that they wanted to differentiate more. Of course, that's from pressure from One Nation that is very clear.
And that's why I asked this question. It's obviously about numbers, but it's also, as Tony Abbott said there, that they should be prepared to distinguish on values, not race or religion, but on values. So anyway, that'll be interesting to see where Angus Taylor goes on that. We need to come back to what's going on right now, and that is the ballots for who is going to be deputy leader after Angus Taylor won the leadership. Jane Norman, let me come back to you. As PK mentioned, Melissa Price has been knocked out in the first round of voting. That leaves 3 candidates. Do we have any update there?
No update. I'm just madly texting people inside, but there's a second ballot is required. So Melissa Price got knocked out in the first round. We have 3 there. So yeah, another ballot is happening as we speak. Jane Hume was the majority winner last time, followed by Dan Tehan, followed by O'Brien. Now, Ted O'Brien, you'd imagine the 16 votes would have been on the moderate side. So the 2 moderates have basically been knocked out of this race. Well, One moderate has been knocked out of this race.
Moderate.
That leaves
O'Brien's
Ted
still
O'Brien
there.
contesting as the only moderate, in the next one. So we now have Jane Hume, Dan Tehan and Ted O'Brien contesting this ballot. So it'll be very interesting to see who's knocked out next and if indeed it becomes a moderate versus conservative in the final round. But counting's underway. I'm just seeing if there's any update. No
you would
update
think,
so
based
far
on those
from what's
numbers, that
happening
Dan
inside.
Tehan, if he only had 13 votes, will be the next one to be knocked out. With those two Melissa Price votes being reallocated to other candidates, even if they both went to Dan Tehan, he wouldn't have enough. So he'd probably go in the next round. That's presumably happening now. We may end up with a contest between Jane Hume and Ted O'Brien, which I think, PK, is what we suggested at the very outset we would see, a contest between those two.
And what you'll see, this is becoming quite clear from the numbers, is I know that a lot of the numbers that you see there for Jane Hume are actually coming from the right.
Yes.
And so Ted O'Brien is actually getting the moderates numbers. There's a lot of frustration and grumpiness towards Jane Hume for being too aligned with the Conservatives. And obviously she's a great supporter of Angus Taylor's and has stood by him. As we said before, it's all about the legacy, and they work together in the economic team under Peter Dutton. Look, I mean, it's too... They're, right now I'm getting lots of messages too. They're voting in the second round. And I think that second round is quite key. I suspect you are absolutely right that we will see... ultimately, Tehan more likely to be knocked out. Don't forget, and Fiona, you would know this, that they are very aware of their, and I'm putting it in inverted commas because I know I upset people sometimes, woman problem.
Yeah.
And there is one in terms of who votes for them, who they have in their leadership positions. That is a key issue, and that will have to be playing into the minds of people as they vote now.
It would be. I mean, but even if we end up with a contest, which way it's looking, between Ted and Jane, I mean, they're two very competent, capable people. There is also a view amongst people that, you know, the treatment of Jane over the last 9 months has also not necessarily been fair.
Dropping her from the front bench.
Dropping her from the front bench and those sorts of things. So you need to put your best team on the paddock, but there's also been a lot of anger towards Jane around what happened in the last election. So, you know, I think there's a lot of conflict there, and I find it also interesting in the narrative that Jane Hume being referred to now as a Conservative when she has always been a moderate. And if you sat and have a conversation with Jane...
Well, it's interesting you say that, because during it's such a key point. She's not a Conservative.
No, she's not.
And you know better than anyone that your factions are not quite the same as the Labor factions. She supported Angus Taylor because people make individual judgments. But equally, about net zero. She campaigned publicly to maintain net zero by 2050. She lost that battle, but I wonder how influential she could be in the year of Angus Taylor in the future about climate policy, because there is a real conflict between winning metropolitan Australia on climate change and the call from the Conservatives and the right to be more hardline on issues of climate. That's going to be a difficult one.
No, it's a really good point. More broadly, though, your point about you do need to have the right team in your front line, in your front bench.
Correct.
Is there a risk that Angus Taylor rewards his supporters? I mean, you've got to do that to a degree, but you end up with a similar situation where Sussan Ley's backers are punished and left on the back bench, and that breeds this resentment again. And
I think that's probably, you know, I concur with Tony's comments around Sussan, and, you know, that losing the leadership, she has tried her best, and taking the leadership after such a catastrophic failure is a very difficult task. But we're at a point that you just have to sit down after this. There has to be a kumbaya moment where you bring your best team onto the pitch.
Jane, Norman has an update for us. Jane.
Hello. Okay, so the latest is that Dan Tehan, as we expected, has been knocked out of this race. So Jane Hume has won 21 votes, Dan Tehan 11, Ted O'Brien 18. So this is becoming a Ted O'Brien-Jane Hume contest for the deputy leadership of the party, and another informal vote. Someone is sitting in that party room right now. I don't know what they're doing, putting a love heart or a cross through, but either way, they're not marking their secret ballot. So this is coming down to a moderate versus a Conservative. And interesting, there are a lot of things to weigh in this deputy contest. There are states, there is gender, and there's factions. And so in the deputy and the leader, they try and sort of have a blend of all of those. And that's really going through the minds of the MPs sitting in that party room right now.
Well, I can double confirm those numbers. So we've always here at the ABC, people know we tell you how many sources we have. We have a few, Jane Hume on 21 votes, Ted O'Brien on 18 and Dan Tehan on 11, which knocks him out. So now it's Ted O'Brien, as we were saying, who's the current deputy, David. So he's trying to basically keep his job. He's fighting to keep his job.
This is really unclear now if there are 11 votes, well, 12 votes, because there was one informal. Maybe this one informal is just deeply unimpressed with the...
absolutely. No, this is not somebody who's incompetent. I think it's a statement of this is just not what I want to be doing.
Perhaps. Anyway, so you've got 11 or 12 votes now up for grabs to go either Jane Hume's way or Ted O'Brien's way, and frankly, they're pretty close on that latest round, 21 to Jane Hume, 18 to Ted O'Brien. So where do those 11 or 12 go is pretty hard to read. Frankly, I think we've discussed the choice that's there and the conundrum, I suppose.
I am going to have a red hot take. Are you ready?
Yeah, go.
I think Jane Hume will win.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Who cares? Because I'm saying it's my view based on the people I'm talking to. I think some numbers will break her way. Couple of reasons. The right wingers who voted for Dan Tehan, because he's kind of centre-right, were more likely to vote for Jane Hume, I think, out of that proposition. And I think the gender issue is not irrelevant. I think people are really aware that they're knocking off Sussan Ley. I mean, they've just knocked her off, that's clear. And I suspect Jane could be victorious. But until we get that final number, that is not based on fact, but based on the many people I'm talking to.
A prediction. No, that's fair enough. We will see. We'll see where that ends. I want to bring in Jason Falinski. He's a former Liberal MP and a leading moderate in the party organisation as well. Jason, look, thank you for joining us. Just your reaction firstly. We'll get your thoughts on the deputy contest, which is proving a much tighter run thing. But on the leadership, Angus Taylor's prevailed, and by a healthy margin, 34 votes to 17. What does that say to the electorate at large about the direction the Liberal Party is now heading in?
Oh, well, we'll have to wait and see. As Annabelle and PK have been discussing, Angus has certainly comes from the Conservative faction in the Liberal Party, but he takes a more traditional economic approach to a lot of the issues facing Australia. So if we go back to framing our solutions in economic terms, then that's certainly a much healthier and I would say productive electoral strategy than some that we've been pursuing to date. But the margin definitely, I think, shows what you said, Spearsy, which is he should have some confidence around that. But also, I think a large number of the parliamentary party were just over it and wanted to move on. When
he also says that he wants to restore the way of life for Australians, what do you take that to mean? I take that to be prosperity. I mean, I heard Tony Abbott talk about values in that, but I think what most Australians have come to expect from Australia is the dream, the promise that we put out there, which was each generation will be better off than the last one. And for too many Australians at the moment, they feel that their lifestyles, their families, their communities are in not terminal decline, but sustained decline. And the numbers bear that out. We have been in a per capita GDP recession since the end of 2022, and all the news around the economy has been negative at the start of this year with interest rates going up, etc. And so I think that that's what he means, and I think that's what Australians, even if they can't verbalise that, that's what they're feeling and that's what they mean by what they expect out of their governments.
Jason Falinski, we spend too much time together. People are going to start talking, but let me ask my question. Sussan Ley being rolled, and actually, if you look at the numbers, not doing very well at the end. It was not close. She has been emphatically defeated. That's a pretty big blow to the moderates, isn't it? And your sensible centre, let's move to the centre. Isn't that a blow to that mission?
Oh, well, PK, I'm going to give you the answer that I've given to you many times on this occasion. This isn't about left or right. This is about up or down. And I would say to everyone in the party, regardless of which tribe they come from, they need to come up with a message, a narrative that resonates with the vast amount of Australians, that we have the policies and the ideas that are going to make their lives easier and better. At the moment, we continue to talk to ourselves about ourselves. We are letting off a government that is producing some very bad outcomes for all Australians, and we are abrogating our duty as both a political movement, party and parliamentary team.
And just on that, the values that resonate, what do you think, Jason Falinski, about Tony Abbott's suggestion there that the immigration policy should include distinguishing on values who can come to Australia?
Well, I think what Tony's reflecting there is an underlying concern in Australia that our social cohesion is being very much tested at the moment. And I don't think there's any coincidence that while correlation isn't causation, that following the massacre at Bondi Beach, that there was a large surge in votes for One Nation, because I think a lot of Australians tie immigration to social cohesion in this country coming apart. Now, the fact of the matter is we have as a nation traditionally had high levels of immigration, particularly compared to other parts of the world, and our social cohesion hasn't been tested in that way. So something is going on in this country. Immigration is certainly something that people are pointing to as part of the problem, but I would point out to them that historically that hasn't been the case.
Just final question for you, Jason Falinski. I'm wondering the moderate wing of the Liberal Party, its perspective on where things are at. You've lost so many seats over the last 2 elections in urban Australia. In the period since the last election, you've walked away from net zero, now dumped first female leader, elected a Conservative in Angus Taylor. Is this where the moderate wing of the Liberal Party really wants things to be?
Well, I think those of us in the Liberal wing of the Liberal Party would probably say to you, as I said to PK after the last election, things are going to get worse before they get better. We have been putting off too many debates for too long. And so this is part of the journey we're on, and we will undoubtedly find out what happens at this point. I would remind people that when Tony Abbott became opposition leader in 2009, that there were a lot of people in the Canberra Press Gallery who thought that this was a lurch to the right and that he would be unelectable as leader. And we all know how that turned out. So I'm not willing to look into the seeds of time and say that the whole thing's going to wither. But yeah, look, we have a lot of hard work ahead of us. And it starts with coming up with a message to the Australian people.
Jason Falinski, thank you very much for joining us. I want to go back to Jane Norman, who's keeping an eye on this deputy vote. Jane, what have you got?
I can confirm Jane Hume has won the deputy race. She's won, I've got from 2 sources, 30 votes to Ted O'Brien's 20. So this really mirrors the leadership vote, Angus Taylor prevailing over Sussan Ley. So there we have it, the new Liberal leadership team. Angus Taylor from New South Wales and Senator Jane Hume from Victoria will be leading the Liberal Party after today. I can confirm Sussan Ley, who has lost this leadership ballot today, will be addressing the media at some point. But first, Aaron Violi, who'll be emerging from the party room to announce this result.
Jane, thank you. Well done. The leadership confirmed. Let's listen to the whip and Aaron Violi.
This morning there was a spill motion for the leadership of the Liberal Party of Australia. That motion was successful. A ballot was conducted for the leadership. There was 2 candidates, Sussan Ley and Angus Taylor. And Angus Taylor was successful, 33 votes to 17, and is now the leader of the Liberal Party of Australia.
And further to that, deputy leadership was also declared vacant. We had 4 candidates and Senator Jane Hume has been victorious. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the party whip there, Aaron Violi, confirming the outcome that we've been reporting for some time. Although he said 33 to 17, we've been told 34 to 17 was the outcome on the leadership. Either way, an emphatic win for Angus Taylor.
33 to 17, yeah.
OK, and then for Jane Hume to emerge as deputy, 30 votes to 20. I'm told there was one informal still in deputy.
That person just had a bad day, David. They don't want to vote for anyone.
But the outcome there, formalised by the party whip, Aaron Violi, and no doubt we will hear from Sussan Ley and Angus Taylor. But that is a significant win for Angus Taylor, the 59-year-old, to become the 17th leader of the Liberal Party. He hasn't yet laid out big ideas to turn around this very, very low ebb the party is at, but he has talked about, as we've been discussing, restoring the way of life, lifting standards of living and taking up a stronger fight to Labor. Now, he's talked too about strong and decisive leadership as a point of difference to Sussan Ley. So whether that means that within the party room we'll see less of the sort of consultation that Sussan Ley adopted in the time that she was in the role, and more of a decisive captain's call leadership approach on certain issues, we shall see. Immigration is expected to be the first policy measure out of the box. So where that goes from here, PK, will be interesting.
Yes, and I can tell you that the Australian Labor Party, quick off the mark, has sent 2 videos. Angus Taylor, just another Liberal, ready to roll out a campaign.
Thank you very much.
Let's just check, sorry PK, what that was. Is Did anyone catch that?
He probably corrected the last
counts?
remark.
Right, so that we were the correct ones, weren't we? At the
Well,
start?
yeah, well, yes, but I think what has happened is he has reported the spill motion numbers as opposed to the
Okay, so we were right.
He misspoke. We were right.
Okay,
we knew the vote better than the whip. We love Aaron Violi. He's a regular on my show, Afternoon Briefing. I wouldn't say a bad word about him, but yes, we got the vote right. The Labor Party is getting ready to frame, that's politics, to establish the reputation in the public's eye for Angus Taylor. Just another Liberal. They'll talk about his economic failures. He wanted you to pay more taxes. He was a failure in the economic portfolio. Top end of town stuff, expect that. That he's out of touch with ordinary people, of course, even though he's there, supported by Conservatives, to try to appeal to some of these voters who are peeling off to One Nation. He's not exactly sort of a Barnaby Joyce figure or a Pauline Hanson figure. He's a Rhodes Scholar. He has a very different reputation, and so Labor will try and really frame him in this sort of out-of-touch way, and that's exactly what they're doing.
Look, let's be honest. That's what Labor's been doing for the last 2 weeks in
They
Parliament.
have, but they're ready to roll out with their material, right?
I think their material's been ready for a long time.
Yeah, Annabelle Crabb, let me bring you in here because it's all now done and dusted. The result is clear, big win for Angus Taylor and ultimately for Jane Hume as well as the deputy. That avoids the two dudes scenario that you were suggesting we might see earlier. Jane Hume as deputy, you can see what Labor will do with that, pointing to what happened in the election campaign from the pair who were the Shadow Treasurer and Shadow Finance Minister. But it means that at least there is some gender balance there in the leadership team.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to recommend the partnership. Firstly, two people who genuinely like each other and work well together. A bit of diversity across the factions, not factions, even though there's a bit of dispute about where exactly Jane Hume lands these days. She's sort of generally a moderate. And of course, she's also a woman, which means that the party doesn't get the full "we've gone for bloke" headlines. I have to acknowledge Anthony Green, who came up with that one-liner. It's not mine. But it's interesting. I think this has been such a vibe kind of leadership contest. Just listening to Tony Abbott listing, and he was, of course, the guy who sponsored Angus Taylor into Parliament all those years ago, saying that the three priorities should be energy policy, immigration policy, and support for the flag. It's just, those are entirely the priority areas that Peter Dutton escalated and elevated during the election campaign of 2025, and we all know where that ended. If there is one policy commitment that can be ascribed to Sussan Ley's stewardship of the party, it is the abandonment of the net zero deal at the encouragement of Angus Taylor and, of course, Barnaby Joyce, former Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Nationals, which is ironic because Angus Taylor and Barnaby Joyce also put that deal together 5 years earlier. This is what we're dealing with here. I think there is an elasticity around commitment to policy long term, which I think is driving this move away from the Liberal Party. And what we're seeing from Angus Taylor as the new leader of the Liberal Party is essentially I will do it better. I can't say exactly how. Maybe we're going to hear it today, but there's a little whisper of that great King Lear line, I will do such things, I know not what they are, but they will be the terrors of the earth. Can't wait to see what they are.
I love that you've just pulled out some Shakespeare. This is why we love Crabb. Look, but Annabelle, this is a huge win, though. Angus Taylor didn't scrape over.
No,
that all but ends
double
the leadership ambitions of Sussan Ley. I just think it's important to mention that sometimes you get the battle that keeps going. It happened with Turnbull and Abbott, of course, because it was close. But Sussan Ley, you'd have to think her leadership aspirations are kind of over now.
Oh, look, absolutely. And I think before we all move on and forget about the last 9 months and this experiment in leadership that the Liberal Party embarked upon after the terrible defeat of the 2025 election campaign, we should pay tribute to the first female leader of the Liberal Party. I think, obviously, according to the polls and to the conclusions of her own party colleagues, it hasn't been a successful experiment. I think that what has typified her leadership of the party is an extraordinary degree of resilience, of lack of fussiness and self-obsession. I'd note that she's walked into the party room today wearing what I would describe as Agnes of Rome chic, white from head to toe. She is a bit of a martyred figure. She's spent her time in leadership trying to work things out with colleagues who sometimes made unreasonable demands. She spent a lot of it managing dues in the National Party, and spent most of the time that a lot of her colleagues were on holidays working incredibly hard over the summer. So this will be the end of her leadership career, as you say, absolutely. She's been in Parliament for a long time, but it is a significant period in the Liberal Party, nonetheless.
Annabelle, look, thank you. We'll come back to you, and a wonderful description, really, of Sussan Ley's entrance to that party room meeting. Look, we've heard from a couple of former MPs, including a former Prime Minister in Tony Abbott, big supporter of Angus Taylor. I want to go to another former Liberal Senator, Holly Hughes. Holly Hughes, fair to say you've not been such a great fan of Angus Taylor, so what do you make of his elevation as Liberal leader this morning?
Well, I think that's a fair assessment there, David, and I must say I enjoyed Annabelle's phrase of elasticity of policy. I normally describe it as a lack of conviction. There'd be plenty of policy areas where most people can't tell you, including those in the party room, where Angus stands. He's got a really big job ahead of him now. I think he's got to win the trust back of not only the party room, but a number of Australians. He consistently said he wasn't challenging for the leadership, or that he wouldn't answer a question, and then puts out a very polished social media video that was clearly filmed not in Canberra. So I don't think it got off to the best start as someone who's coming with integrity and transparency in the way that this was all manifested and put together. I personally think I'm going to go a bit further probably than others, saying Sussan's leadership aspirations are probably dead. I'd suggest Angus's first challenge is potentially a by-election in Farah. And if I was Sussan, why the hell would you stay? And she's got young grandchildren, why would you?
Have you spoken to Sussan Ley at all about this? Is that, do you think, on her mind?
No, I haven't spoken to her about it, but as someone who resigned from the Liberal Party last year and has not spent a day regretting that decision, I would imagine Sussan is going to reflect whether or not she continues as the member for Farah. And of course, what we've been told by a lot of Angus's supporters is he's going to stop the bleed. He's going to make sure that all these voters that have flocked to One Nation will come back. And I think that'll be probably one of the most significant tests, is you'll have One Nation, you'll probably have an independent, you'll have a three-corner contest at a minimum with Labor, Nats and Libs. I mean, Sussan won the seat after Tim Fischer resigned from Parliament, so it was actually a National Party seat. So I can't imagine the New South Wales National Party are going to say, don't worry, we're not going to run. And of course, then there's also the relationship with the Nationals. How is that going to proceed going forward? So I think there's a lot of challenges. We need to hear more the motherhood statements in pre-recorded social media. And
well, I just want to come back to that, because your point earlier that you think Angus Taylor lacks conviction. Sorry, we're just seeing MPs filing out of the room now. James Paterson heading off in one direction. Andrew Bragg, a leading moderate, not looking thrilled at the outcome. Jane Norman is outside the room. They're starting to come out now, Jane. No, Jane will come back to...
Yeah, so what you'll see now...
Sorry, Jane?
I'm very sorry. I just actually caught Angus Taylor's media advisor in my eye to ask when indeed they might be coming out. So, yeah, we're seeing the members and senators filing out of the room now, and we are expecting in this very courtyard shortly to see Jane Hume and Angus Taylor come out here to front the media. So that's what we're standing by for now. Obviously, as you mentioned, a very emphatic victory for both. The Conservatives very much getting the numbers on their side. And what's kind of notable about this was that in the lead up to this vote, The Taylor camp was very sensitive to any suggestion that there was a ticket, like that Angus Taylor was, running with Jane Hume on the same ticket. It was pretty well known that it was sort of an informal ticket, but they have very much prevailed in getting the two candidates they wanted up from the Conservative side. And Jane Hume and Angus Taylor have addressed the party room. I'm trying to get some information about what they actually told their colleagues, but that is what's been the sort of gap between Aaron Violi's announcement and waiting for the two leaders to emerge.
Okay, we are seeing more MPs filing out of the room, and their expressions are always fascinating to watch, and I always feel that the deposed leader has the tough walk through the gauntlet there to pass the cameras. Tim Wilson, a brief appearance, but...
Pretty in pink. He made the joke about wearing pink, so there he is. He's likely to say something. Dean Smith walked out and said an excellent outcome.
We all need to get to the Karvelas agricultural show because it is apparently the hottest ticket in Monash.
Okay, why not use the opportunity for a local plug there? Dave Sharma, Melissa McIntosh, Zoe McKenzie, others, Tony Passon up the back there starting to come out. Those in the middle, the moderates, the Conservatives, as Jane mentions, we will see Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, the victors this morning, stand up shortly to tell us about where they now plan to take the party. Jacob Grieber is with us. They've won, both of them, with a healthy margin, but particularly that leadership vote, 34 to 17. 2/3 of the party have backed Angus Taylor. That size of win will be important.
Sorry, I was just checking what the Karvelas agricultural show is all about. It's a horse and pony show, so good luck.
It's Angus Taylor. Was that Angus Taylor just crossed our screen there? Sorry, I just caught out the side of the corner of my eye. He's crossed back to, I think, his office, but we'll see more from him later. Jacob?
Not appearing for now. Yeah, no, look, that is a clear win for Angus Taylor. In the end, the numbers were nowhere near close. He's got a large group of the waverers that were in the middle. He will have also got a significant number of the moderates. Tim Wilson had a big smile on his face. Perhaps he was one of them. Perhaps he's, hoping for greater things himself.
Treasury?
I think, I was going to say, yeah. So this is the big question.
Yeah.
There's Ted O'Brien.
Ted
Just
O'Brien
lost the deputy leadership.
And has he also lost the Treasury portfolio?
I think it's unlikely that Ted O'Brien will be kept in the Treasury portfolio. My intel is that that's a conversation that Angus has been having with others.
And Angus Taylor,
his Tian.
Dan Tian, who lost the deputy leadership race, he's a member for Wannon in Victoria.
Don't expect we'll see a front bench announced today or tomorrow. You would think Angus Taylor want to take some time. But there's Sussan Ley, keeping a brave smile on her face and still supported by her loyal backers there, Paul Scarr, Anne Ruston, Maria Kovacic as well. No comment from Sussan Ley just now. We may see more from Sussan Ley shortly. That's never an easy task to explain what's just happened.
No, I've just got a text message actually from one senior Lib who says, look, to be honest, everyone's quite traumatised after that meeting. I think even with the emphatic win, changing a leader only after 9 months is a heavy decision, a difficult decision, and one that actually, I know there was the revolving door for a while, but the Liberal Party historically always is reluctant to support a spill.
2 votes. The spill motion was 33 to 17 with 1 informal vote. The final vote was 34 to Angus Taylor, 17 to Sussan Ley. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love it. We finally got the right numbers.
You got one job. Good to clear that up for the record, though.
Maybe I should offer myself up as whip.
Jacob, look, yes, we can speculate about the front bench, but a couple of positions will be important. Typically, the deputy gets a decision or a big say in what role they want. Jane Hume is in the Senate, and yes, that's happened before. I think Fred Chaney you've got to go back to have a deputy leader in the Senate. I don't know if you'd want to put your Treasury spokesperson in the Senate, where you need to be keeping the pressure on the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, in the lower house. So it would make, I think, more sense to have whether it's Ted O'Brien, Tim Wilson or someone else in the lower house as the shadow treasurer. But that's an important role and also comes with the added authority of that important role. You've got the foreign post to fill, maybe Michaelia Cash stays there. But where does Ted O'Brien land?
Well, I was actually trying to think of where does Jane Hume land. That's not straightforward at all. One obvious thing you might think is finance, so that she is in one of those portfolios that is relevant to a lot of people. But that, of course, is held by James Paterson, who is one of Angus Taylor's strongest supporters in this scenario. I can't see him being moved on out of that. He's been very successful.
In that finance role before the last election. I don't know if you know.
I'm not sure, but even I think there might even be a constitutional question mark over the person responsible for getting supply through the lower house being in the upper house. That feels a bit funny.
In opposition.
Probably not in opposition, no. but in terms of the symbolism, it's probably not right.
Yeah.
There are other things that she'll need, but of course, where does cash fit into this? Where does Duniam fit into this? Well, these are all important players. And Angus Taylor's first job will be solving a four-dimensional chess puzzle on this.
I'll give you one hot tip. I think Andrew Hastie for Foreign Affairs. I've spoken to Andrew Hastie's supporters. Remember, he had a very big group of supporters who believe he's not...
Put your closest rival on a plane. It's the oldest.
But it's also interesting, right? Because he always wanted an economic portfolio, but his economic ideas are actually vastly different to those of Angus Taylor. So I think that's a strategic decision as well. You don't want to be in the economic frame when you're arguing for different things.
By the way, Labor already having a bit of fun with the fact that it took 3 goes for the whip to announce the outcome of the party room ballot. Anyway, the picture you can see in the bottom of your screen there is where Angus Taylor and Jane Hume will shortly emerge to address the media. I can't imagine this will be a lengthy press conference, but an initial public statement from the two of them as to the outcome and how they now plan to unite the party. The size of that win helps with that task, at least, of keeping some unity. Those frontbench decisions will also be critical in trying to keep the show together, not wanting to simply reward backers and punish those who voted the other way. There will need to be an effort here to show that they are serious about winning back votes, both on the right and the left, from One Nation and the Teals. And that begins really from day one. So we will recap now. It's just gone 10 o'clock, an hour since this party room meeting began, and as expected, Angus Taylor has won the leadership, and he's done so emphatically, 34 votes to 17, double Sussan Ley's support. So the Liberal Party has opted here to shift from their first female leader after 9 months to Angus Taylor, the 59-year-old who now becomes the 17th leader of the Liberal Party. Jane Hume also comfortably won the deputy's post against Ted O'Brien. A few other candidates were in the mix. Ted O'Brien and Dan Tehan and Melissa Price. They were knocked out in earlier rounds. It came down to a head-to-head between the current deputy and Jane Hume. Jane Hume winning that 30 votes to 20. Jane Hume a moderate, Angus Taylor a conservative, but the two are close, and Jane Hume backed Angus Taylor in the leadership ballot after the election last year. They also worked very closely together in their shadow treasury, shadow finance roles in the last term of Parliament, and that's where Labor will focus its attack, on their record in those economic portfolios and the plan they took to the election that did include opposing tax cuts and increasing the personal income tax rates and a couple of years of higher deficits as well. Nonetheless, their task now will be to broaden out and be bold when it comes to big ideas to turn around the Liberal Party's fortunes. The party is at a very low ebb. You can see more Conservatives filing out of the room there. Michaelia Cash, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price. We've seen others emerge as well. Phil Thompson, who moved the spill motion along with Jess Collins earlier. Not sure what he was holding up to the camera there, but
looked like a straw or
the pencil that cast
a pencil. The symbolism of the pencil that wrote the name.
Mightier than the sword, PK.
Well, stick to pencil.
Or was that the pencil that went missing for that one informal vote?
Who was the informal?
Yeah, anyway, we don't know.
Yeah.
I love can I say, people are watching this, I know in all of the political offices, if you are the informal voter, come forward and talk to us and explain why you couldn't commit.
I don't.
Do you have commitment issues?
That's going to happen. Let me go back to Holly Hughes, former Liberal Senator and Angus Taylor critic, who was speaking to us a little earlier. I just want to pick up, Holly Hughes, on what you were mentioning earlier about you think Angus Taylor lacks conviction on policy. Just explain to us what makes you say that, because of course his supporters are saying that no, he's strong and decisive and he's a Howard Costello economic mould type of guy. Where do you think it's unclear where Angus Taylor stands?
Well, he was the energy minister pushing renewables and the whole net zero plan, and now all of a sudden he's missed a conviction against net zero. He was shadow treasurer, who's apparently committed to improving Australian standard of living and giving them a better life, yet went to the election last year with higher taxes for Australians. And I mean, it's just all over the show. Remember, Jane and Angus were also the two lead members of the Shadow Expenditure Review Committee, which came under a lot of criticism after the election, and the disastrous election it was, that so many policies weren't released, but they had been submitted to the Shadow Expenditure Review Committee, and they just seemed to disappear into a black hole. So when you're talking about this is a big policy framework that's going to come out, well, look, I hope I'm pleasantly surprised and that's what actually occurs. But if history is going to repeat itself, I'm not sure I'd be holding my breath. I think there's also, you've got to keep in mind, there'll be people that are being dumped from the front bench as he needs to reward, and he will be rewarding, no doubt, if you listen to the rhetoric of some of his supporters over the last couple of days. I don't think this is potentially the end for the Liberal Party's party room instructions, the way that Sussan was undermined from day one. You know, if I was Angus, I'd be thinking, well, I wonder if I'm going to get the same loyalty and support that I showed to Sussan.
Holly Hughes, look, appreciate your thoughts this morning as this news unfolds. Thanks so much for joining us. Look, just to confirm as well that Sussan Ley will be addressing the media at some point this morning, so stick with us. We're about to see Angus Taylor and Jane Hume address the media, but stick with us. We will show you Sussan Ley and her remarks. The member for Farah, as her office is now referring to her, no longer the leader of the opposition. So, Jacob, that will be a difficult moment. The big moment, though, we're about to see for Angus Taylor and Jane Hume. What do they do here? The pitch was pretty broad, pretty vague.
This is a huge point for both, but particularly Angus Taylor. This will be one of those press conferences, appearances that'll be clipped up forevermore. It's one of those ones that people refer back to. This is how you set out your agenda months and months, years ago. Did you live up to it or not? So really, really important. And I think the other thing that Liberals are looking for is, what is it that is going to be different? What's the magic that changes this diabolical situation for this party? Is it just shades of grey, a little bit of nuance on what Sussan Ley was all about, or are we talking about something that really catches people's imagination?
Just while we wait for that to start, Jason Falinski is still with us. Jason, we've been discussing, what's going to happen on the front bench, and without going through an exhaustive list, those key roles, those senior roles, really will matter here in not just the policy formulation, but the message that Angus Taylor wants to present to voters. What would be your advice?
Just to clarify something, the Shadow Treasurer has to be in the House of Representatives because under the Magna Carta, money bills have to be initiated in the House of Reps.
So even the Shadow Treasurer needs to be there. That's interesting.
Even the Shadow Treasurer under convention. So I would think in that instance, Angus would be looking at someone like Tim Wilson to be Shadow Treasurer.
Not Ted O'Brien?
I think he would want a clean break with the Sussan era, so he'll probably, and let's face it, Tim Wilson has been, as we saw this week with the CFMEU, has been incredibly effective as Shadow Minister for Workplace Relations. And then, of course, there's James Patterson, who's had the role of coordinating policy, and he's been able to do that much more effectively as Shadow Finance Minister. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jane Hume might stick a hand up and say, well, I'll do Foreign Affairs as Deputy Leader. So, this is a four-dimension chess game, but it has important implications in terms of what sort of framing the Liberal Party takes into under Angus's leadership.
It does. All right, well, there's some interesting tips there as well. Jason Falinski, thank you for joining us this morning. We'll let you go, but appreciate your input as this news has been unfolding. So, PK, we won't hear those portfolio announcements right now from Angus Taylor.
Absolutely not.
Coming back to Jacob's point, he's right. This really matters, the message that you send from the get-go, from day one.
It is the most important press conference that a new leader does. It is, firstly, your sort of stump speech, how you get out of the blocks, the enthusiasm. You would have heard, and I think it's important to mention the sort of context. We have had conservative commentators, Andrew Bolt on Sky, for instance, talk about the lack of enthusiasm from Angus Taylor. So given that sort of Sky After Dark audience, that's the Liberal Party's base, that's the One Nation bleed, that's key for Angus Taylor to lock in. Remember, he's the Conservative candidate. If he can't lock in the kind of people who are bleeding on the right, that will be a problem for him. So he needs to show that he can be straight out of the blocks, strong, define himself, and then be able to handle the tricky questions he'll get. You know, how are you going to be different? Have you got blood on your hands for tearing down the first female leader? He will, I believe, from a couple of sources, although not fully confirmed until I hear it from Angus or Angus Taylor's team, be flanked by Jane Hume. I think that gives him optically as well the deputy that he has the support of. Also, you know, dealing with the woman problem the party has, which it does. And they'll be able to sort of deal with the questions that come to them. And they will, especially when they're together.
Well, here he comes now. Let's listen to Angus Taylor. Oh, that's not... OK.
That is definitely...
That was a live shot. That's
that must be him declaring his hand the other night.
OK, apologies.
And that's the video?
All right. We are shortly going to be joined, though, while we await Angus Taylor's live press conference. We're going to be joined by Dan Tehan shortly, who did run for the deputy but was unsuccessful. Jacob, just some further thoughts from you on where things are now at in a, I guess, zoom out, bigger picture sense for the party. They've opted to ditch their first female leader. They've gone with the Conservative in Angus Taylor, but they've done so emphatically. They clearly believe he will have more cut through, more fight against Labor.
So the Liberal Party, and it's not me saying this, it's Liberals saying this, people like James Paterson, this is existential for the Liberal Party. The alarm bells were ringing a long time ago, they're now deafening. One of the first things Angus Taylor has to do is as simple as re-enliven the base to raise money. There's a big rule change that comes into force in the middle of this year. The game is get as much money into various funding vehicles as you can before the 1st of July.
And how's that going for the Liberal Party
That cannot have been going well up until now. And so his first job is really basic. It's get that money flowing again. But otherwise, they have a structural deficit to Labor.
It's a chicken and egg problem, though. How do you get the donors if they think you're going to be a laughing stock and no chance of ever getting back in government for a very long time? How do you convince them to donate money? You've got to perform. You've got to actually be... You've got to show some momentum behind you to attract those donors.
The level of difficulty is like that third jump in the moguls.
A Winter Olympics reference. It's very good.
It's easy to crash this one out. And look, I've had a number of Liberals say to me this morning, look, we're going to be back here in name the number of months, 3, 6, 12 months. So there is an awareness how difficult a job this is for Angus Taylor.
And that's because of the metrics, David, that were established, which I thought was a risky thing to say, by James Paterson himself yesterday as one of the chief supporters of Angus Taylor. Talked about the opinion polls. He said that Sussan Ley was basically as unpopular as Simon Crean 23 years ago. So when you talk about...
He didn't make the same mistake of doing it himself, did he? It wasn't like when Malcolm Turnbull went through the news poll defeats of Tony Abbott.
Right, it wasn't
Angus Taylor has a bit of distance.
However, when the moderates in 9 months and nothing shifted, in that scenario, will be able to say, hang on a minute, you guys said that this would shift, it hasn't, and it provides another opportunity. Either way, I do think, though, it's worth noting that actual result was quite good for Angus Taylor. That shows to me an appetite in the party room to try and get on with things too. There are people who are pretty devastated that this is all they're doing.
You'll have to put a little daily ticker on the bottom of your show. Votes gained or lost to the Liberal Party this week.
Should we do the sort of lettuce Liz Truss thing?
Look, for those awaiting with anticipation the press conference from Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, I should just alert you that feel free to put the kettle on, because it's not going to be until closer to 11 o'clock or thereabouts, we're being told by his office. So stick with us. We'll have plenty before then. We're going to be hearing from various Liberals, but the new leader and new deputy leader are still about 50 minutes away, so stand by. We might hear from Sussan Ley before then. Annabelle Crabb is with us still as well. And yes, that point about not quite going full Malcolm Turnbull and saying, Tony Abbott lost 30 news polls in a row and that's why we've got to change. But James Paterson did clearly nominate the dire situation in the polls as the big reason for this change. That means the stopwatch begins. It's on. He's got to lift that poll number.
Yeah, well, I guess it was the only available reason because there doesn't seem to be any specific kind of policy-based reason that has driven this entire instability over the last couple of months. So, I mean, you've got to have a reason for proceeding, and Patterson, who I think articulated it all, reasonably cogently, said, look, the verdict's in on this leader, we can't continue, and so here we go. So I guess the pressure is on, as everybody has observed, Angus Taylor to lift the lid today on how his approach is going to differ. I mean, the 2 points that he's made in public kind of campaigning over recent days are that he'd like to lift Australian living standards and he'd like to restore Australian values. Now, it would be tough to find anybody who would not broadly associate themselves with those 2 aims. The big structural problem, or one of them facing the Liberal Party at the moment, is that they're not really resonating with anybody under the age of 60 or in the metropolitan centres where the vast majority of Australians reside. If you're looking at people who are really struggling with standards of living and looking forward and not being able to see any prospect of improvement, you're talking about younger Australians. Like, that is the age group that we're talking about. And they're also the age group that is just moving away from the coalition in droves. I mean, this was a really strong pattern at the 2025 election. The most rusted on and faithful coalition voters are aged over 60 and own their own homes. And the people that they need to talk to are people of whom neither of those descriptors are true.
It's a very good point, Annabelle. Just to update you, we will hear from Sussan Ley in about 15 minutes from now. She's going to appear where you can see those cameras set up in the courtyard here at Parliament House. So Sussan Ley, the deposed leader of the Liberal Party, will be fronting the cameras. We'll hear briefly, I'm sure, from her before we then hear from Angus Taylor and Jane Hume half an hour later. With us right now, though, is Dan Tehan, Liberal, well, I was going to say Liberal frontbencher. You quit the frontbench yesterday to stand as Deputy Leader today. You were unsuccessful, Jane Hume ultimately winning the Deputy Leadership. But let's start, before we get to that contest, with the leadership itself. Are you happy with the outcome that sees Angus Taylor become your new leader?
Yeah, look, the party room has spoken and spoken overwhelmingly. And I think, I'd like to start by just congratulating Angus and congratulating Jane, but also passing on to Sussan my thanks for everything that she has done.
Who did you vote for?
So I voted for Angus Taylor, and I obviously, in the deputy, I put myself forward, and that's why I tendered my resignation, because I wanted to stand for that deputy role. I thought that was the right and honourable thing to do.
When did you come to the view that Angus Taylor was a better option?
Well, look, obviously what we've been through over the last 10 or 11 months has been incredibly difficult. A lot of challenges after the huge election defeat in May, and then obviously we saw the split in the coalition, and then we saw some fairly catastrophic polling, and the feedback that I was getting was that things did need to change, and there was no criticism against Sussan and what she'd done, because she, took on the hardest task there is in Australian politics, and that's leader of the opposition after a mammoth.
If you have no criticism of Sussan Ley, why change?
Well, obviously, I'm going to leave that all up to Angus and Jane.
No, but for you,
they'll
own decision.
They'll articulate that.
But your decision to back Angus Taylor, why do you think Sussan Ley did not deserve to continue?
Well, David, right here and now and publicly, I'm not going to go into all that. We're going to hear from Sussan. We're obviously going to hear from Angus and Jane. But I just wanted to make sure that I was, prepared to come out publicly, to congratulate Angus and Jane,
we appreciate that.
Which is fantastic, and also just to thank Sussan for the Herculean task that she undertook and the way that she went about it, and to the very last end, incredibly dignified. unified, did it in an incredibly respectful way, but ultimately in the end faced huge challenges, because where we are on the right of politics, we've got to unify and we've got to present a cohesive alternative to the government.
So, you've changed your leader and it has been an emphatic vote, but you're saying it has to be more than that. So is it the direction the Liberal Party was going in? What sort of values issues do you think that Angus Taylor should embrace?
Well, I think we'll hear from Angus on all that.
I do think it's important, though, that is it just... Well, I'll ask it bluntly if I can, do.
Yeah, yes, of course.
Is it just a cosmetic change? Just a change of spokesperson?
No. I've said, and I said in my statement, I think we need a serious political manifesto which is, true to our values, which clearly articulates where we want to take the nation.
But does Angus Taylor have that manifesto?
Well, look, I'm not going to, cut across what Angus is going to say.
Has it been shared privately, is my question?
So I have no doubt that anyone who stands for leader of the Liberal Party has a very good vision for where they want to take this nation, and I'm not going to get ahead of Angus and Jane. But
you were convinced by his manifesto.
Look, I was convinced that we need to make sure that we have a manifesto that we can all fight behind, that we can all get behind, and that most particularly that we can take to the Australian people. And once again, I look forward to working with Angus and Jane in taking that to the Australian people.
Will we see this manifesto today or soon?
Well, David, I'm not going to jump ahead of what Angus and Jane have to say. You can understand that.
Is it a secret manifesto, or will it be?
No, of course it is going to be a public manifesto, because the ultimate aim in politics is to convince the Australian people that you have a better vision for this nation than the alternative. And
I'm not sure Angus is calling it a manifesto.
Well, no,
yes.
Well, whether it's a manifesto or clear-cut policies, 5 or 6 clear-cut policies, whatever you like, the terminology.
One of the reasons that the Liberal Party cited, or at least James Patterson yesterday, for why Sussan Ley needed to be moved on is how badly she'd gone in the polls. Does that mean that if the polls don't improve in 9 months, the question mark over Angus Taylor taking you to the next election will be an issue again?
Well, I've never based anything on polls. Polls come and go, and we saw that can be a little bit of a trap. With Malcolm Turnbull and Tony Abbott. I think the most important thing is that if people are out listening to their communities, they get a strong sense as to whether you're heading in the right direction or not. And most of my colleagues, or all of my colleagues, are always out in the community listening and acting on that. And that's the most important thing. And I think for all of us now that we've been through that, getting back out and focusing on the Australian people and not ourselves is going to be absolutely vital.
You were unsuccessful in the deputy ballot. Do you still have leadership aspirations of your own?
No, I've always supported leaders when they've been elected. I look forward to getting behind.
Aspirations?
Well, look, I've shown that I had some aspirations. Obviously, the party room has spoken, and I accept that.
But
and that's what you need to do. Well, we'll see what happens into the future, but I can tell you right here and now, I 100% are committed to getting behind.
Let me ask you this. Do you think your gender worked against you running for the deputy leadership?
Look, I've always just put myself out there as someone who, what you see is what you get. I think, I've got values which are very true to the Liberal Party and its traditions. And look, someone who always wants to be bringing everyone together.
The party has an optical issue with women, especially given you've all just taken out your first and only woman leader.
Well, look, we've had female deputies. We've had a leader who was a female. I point though to the Labor Party. They've got a leader, Anthony Albanese, who's male, a deputy who's male. I think the most important thing for us is just to make sure that we've got the policy approach which makes the Australian people stand up and say, yes, you have an alternative. So I think that's the key.
Okay, if things don't improve in the polls, even with a manifesto, are you an option down the track?
No, I'm 100% absolutely firmly behind Angus and Jane. And, you know, the idea when we've just been through this, we have to focus on the Australian people. Okay. We have to focus on...
What role...
David, if we start, you know, talking about anything else other than them, then, you know, we will continue to be looked down upon by them, and that's the key.
What role would you like to play on the front bench? Do you want to stay in your energy portfolio?
I've always served wherever the leader wants me to serve, and I haven't, you know, put forward, and I've never done it, what I would like or what I would like to do. So whatever they see fit and whatever role they'd like me to take on, I'll give it my 110%, and that's you know, that's the commitment I always give to any leader.
In terms of the direction from here, Dan T, and the next policy will be the immigration policy. In fact, Sussan Ley was, I'm told, ready to go with an immigration policy. I'm not sure if it's completely finalised. We heard from Tony Abbott earlier. He was talking about, yes, the need for a clear and strong immigration policy, but one that can distinguish on values, not race or religion, but distinguish on values as to who can come here. Do you agree?
Look, we'll wait and see what Angus has to say. I'm very much, you know, going to leave that to him. He's going to articulate that vision and that policy vision, and I very much want to leave that to him. But, you know, once again, you know, I congratulate him on winning the leadership, and Jane Hume, and also to Sussan Ley, you know, thank you for everything that you've done on the party's part.
We are about to hear from Sussan Ley, but should we expect a by-election in her seat of Farah?
Look, all I'd say is, you know, thank you, Sussan, for what you've done. She's been a great stalwart of the Liberal Party, served it for over 20 years. And
has she been treated fairly, Dan T?
Well, you know, I think that's for the commentators to say.
What do you think? No, you've observed how the party's been going. Do you think she's been given a fair run?
Well, I put my hand on my heart and work very closely with the energy and emissions reduction policy that we put together, obviously on working very hard to bring the coalition back together. So I can put my hand on my heart and say that I did everything I could to support her.
Except you didn't vote for her.
Well, that's that ultimately in the end I came to the conclusion, and that's why I ran for deputy leader, that we did need a change, and that was the message that I was hearing loud and clear in my electorate. And look, that was a tough decision, as I said, David, but I thought it was a necessary one, and that's why I did what I did.
Appreciate these aren't easy decisions or easy moments, but Dan T, and we do appreciate you joining us immediately after this has all happened to talk us through where things are at. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
cheers.
Dan.
All right, we are going to hear shortly from Sussan Ley. You can see the podium being set up for the former leader of the Liberal Party right there now in that courtyard of Parliament House. And then about half an hour after that, we will hear from the new leader, Angus Taylor, and Deputy Jane Hume as well. Casey Briggs is watching along here as well. And Casey, we've been talking about, obviously, the pressure that's going to be on these two right now, but on the policy front too, what they're going to try to be doing in immigration policy and so on to try and reach out to the voters they need to win back. And the voters they need to win back, Casey, are on the left, they're on the right, they're in the regions, they're in the middle, they're everywhere. This is an enormous task.
An enormous task. And so, yeah, do you break this problem into stages and really start focusing on one thing at a time where, you know, the immediate threat, having lost all of their seats in the inner city, the immediate threat is, well, they're at risk of going further backwards in the country, in regional cities, in rural parts of Australia. Is that the most important thing right now? Stop the bleeding. Because Liberal support as measured, well, sorry, opposition support, coalition support as measured in the polls is, you know, roughly, well, high teens, low 20s at the moment, considerably below where it was just 9 months ago. And it's not Labor that's benefiting from that, it's One Nation, benefiting largely from voters peeling away from the coalition, a little bit of consolidation among other right-wing parties that are sort of getting behind the sort of the horse that has some momentum at the moment, and then in Pauline Hanson's One Nation, and a little bit of support peeling off from Labor. But this is primarily a shift from the coalition to One Nation. So is that the number one thing to do? In that case, you might see, and we heard some positioning on that from Tony Abbott earlier this morning. We've heard, you know, hints of that from Angus Taylor in the sort of in as far as he ran a public campaign, the kind of videos that he put out in the press conference from Wednesday, some subtle positioning that sort of suggested that was the direction maybe they were heading. We might hear some more detail on that this morning. But how do you do that, stop the bleeding there, while not also alienating the people in the city? Well, that's going to be the big question. How do you keep money flowing into the coffers of the Liberal Party headquarters with a vastly depleted, sort of, fundraisers? MPs do a lot of fundraising, and there are less of them in the cities, and they rely on a lot of donations from, places like the business community. And then, of course, we'll get a bit of an electoral indication as to, does One Nation manage to maintain its sort of theoretical, latent goodwill support that it's receiving in opinion polls at the moment? Does that convert into an actual election? Can One Nation withstand the scrutiny of an election campaign? Because we've seen parties and leaders can fall apart under that scrutiny. Hello, Peter Dutton. So can they maintain that? Well, we'll get an indication of that in South Australia next month, where One Nation is. Well, there was a poll this week at the state level that suggested One Nation is polling at the state level roughly what it's polling at the federal level. So can they turn that into significant support? Where is that support actually on the map? It'll be our first concrete electoral data to get a better sense for, has the geographical support of One Nation shifted? Is it, as we sort of expect and as the pattern's been in the past? So a few clues there. Can One Nation run into second place in some seats? Can they possibly win any seats? And how bad does the Liberal Party come out of that election in just a month's time? This is a weak South Australian Liberal Party. That's going to be one of the big things I'm watching in the kind of weeks and months ahead. Angus Taylor's not got a lot to do with it, but it's going to inform a lot about the strategy that they employ going forward.
I think that's a really good point, Casey. While the outcome in South Australia might be a foregone conclusion in terms of a Labor win, that performance of One Nation is just going to be fascinating to watch given the moment that we're in on the Conservative side of politics. Casey Briggs, we'll let you go, but thank you so much for joining us this morning as well. Melissa Clark joining us now here in the Parliament House studios. We await the arrival of Sussan Ley there. We should talk a little bit about Sussan Ley here, Mel, while we wait to see her front the cameras here. These are always really, really difficult moments. We've seen leaders teary as they have emerged from an experience like this, having to front the cameras and reflect on all that's happened. MPs, Dan Tehan, we just heard from there, are very reluctant to, weigh into criticism where she went wrong. There'll be many viewing this and saying she was not given a fair go. That's what her supporters were arguing over the last couple of days. But there were mistakes there too. You can't ignore those.
No, absolutely not. I think the point, though, is there was very little buffer for her missteps. Any mistakes that she made, big or small, the difficulty of what the party was dealing with a crushing election lost in 2025, an obvious decline in the polls since then, difficulties with the coalition, which have clearly been very significant and have disrupted a number of timeframes and plans that Sussan Ley would have been able to have. Perhaps those smaller missteps could have been absorbed if there was more of a buffer. There wasn't one for her, and Angus Taylor will inherit that. There is not much buffer for him. I think history is going to be kinder to Sussan Ley than perhaps the colleagues or the margin of the victory today suggests. She did take the helm at a point of a really low ebb in the party. Well, what we thought at the time was a low ebb. It's obviously the tide's gone out further since then. But she did signal in her early speeches a desire to relook at key economic issues. She looked to wanting to focus on budget repair, on wanting to limit the scale of government support and social services to something more sustainable. These are probably the things Angus Taylor is also going to turn to as he tries to, as he will likely put it, to return the focus to the economy. Sussan Ley was attempting to do that. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what she chooses to do next. And we might not get an answer to that straight away today at this press conference that's just about to happen. Maybe she has a definitive answer, but we have seen other leaders in the past take a little bit of time to make a decision about what to do. But we should remember she's been in Parliament for a very long time. She's one of the longest serving MPs we have in Parliament. She's successfully held her seat for, I think it's 9 elections going back to 2001. She's had a long period of being either a minister or a shadow minister. She has led her party. There's not a lot left for her to do at this point. But the question of a potential by-election in her seat could cause more difficulty for her party at the time that it really doesn't need it.
An immediate headache for Angus Taylor. Mel Clark, thank you very much for that. And as people have pointed out, PK, having been elected in 2001, Sussan Ley is still one of the very few, like Anthony Albanese, on the old superannuation rules. That means that they changed in 2004, so you're elected after that. You're on the new superannuation rules, but the old rules mean that you do get that far more generous.
Well, yes, she won't be suffering afterwards. Because of the rules, I'm not making a personal comment because she's under that more generous scheme. That's absolutely right. Look, Mel is right. She has been around since the Howard era. He was the first one, John Howard himself, to promote her to a parliamentary secretary role, so that's a sort of junior role. So that's where her climb started. Of course, under Tony Abbott, under Malcolm Turnbull, Scott Morrison, she continued to rise. And of course, she did lose portfolio position on the sort of travel rorts scandal as well. So she's had ups and downs. I mean, that was a humiliating exercise for her, but she made it back in, which often, what's it called? Politics, the great game of snakes and ladders. You make it up, you go down, you make it back up again. She is. No one can ever take from Sussan Ley that she is the first person who broke the very substantial, thick glass ceiling in the Liberal Party and became its first female Liberal leader. I'm going to be very interested now that we're about to hear her any moment. David, you can see the little screen there. She will come up to the lectern in that courtyard in Parliament House and address the media. But I'll be interested to see how she may reflect on that issue and whether she goes there. And that's always, can I say, I think it's really important to mention this, it is a reluctance of female politicians to talk about gender because gender is always weaponised against women.
Because what you're seen as playing the gender card.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But in this case, column A, column B, absolutely she independently wasn't going very well on the polls. Absolutely these things are the case. There were own goals. Yes, she was every day fronting cameras post-Bondi, but she overreached. There was that moment, for instance, where she went a little over the top over Penny Wong, you'll recall. You know, why isn't Penny Wong crying? Some moments that I think some of her colleagues cringed over, actually, and thought, what's she doing here? However, that's not to say that gender was also not an issue. I've had lots of text messages from Liberals, including Liberal women, saying the party has an issue with being led by a woman who was doing it differently. Think about one of the ways that she led. Consensus. Negotiation, trying to work out where her party room was at. This is a party room that was led by people like Peter Dutton with an iron fist. It's my way or the highway. She tried to do it differently, and quite frankly, it came back to bite her. I think it's actually the one thing they wanted, which is consult us more, have better committees and processes for policy development, is the thing that annoyed them, because what's been weaponised against her is that she stands for nothing, that she has no conviction. Where are her values? She's tried to articulate Liberal values, the Menzies vision, Middle Australia, the sensible centre, and it's backfired. I think this is a party room that wants to be moving to the right. It thinks there are votes to be gained there. The first project of Angus Taylor will be getting the votes, they're theoretical ones until we go to the poll, but getting the support back of people who've gone to One Nation. So his job is going to be to solidify support on the right side of politics, right-wing voters. His biggest problem, though, and that's where Jane Hume comes in, is metropolitan Australia and the offer there. Now, he has a plan. I can tell you what it is, part of it anyway. It's an economic plan. He thinks he's going to win Metro Australia with an agenda for lower taxes, being basically a reforming party that talks about the economy more. People in the cities used to like the Liberal Party for those things, right? So he thinks that's where it's at. It's still to be seen, though, in a world where lots of Teals have won, whether the cultural right-wing issues will hurt him in those places and whether he will be a bridge too far for those voters.
And when we talk about those voters, as we await for Sussan Ley to arrive, when we talk about those voters, we are talking about a lot of women that have moved away from the Liberal Party. Post-election surveys have made this very clear in 22 and 25, last year's election as well. Annabelle, as we await the arrival of Sussan Ley here, is it at all obvious?
Yes,
oh, here she comes. Hold that thought. Sussan Ley is now walking out into the sunny parliamentary courtyard.
On her own.
And a smile still on her face as she arrives to give some remarks after being defeated for the leadership. 17 votes to Angus Taylor's 34 votes. An emphatic defeat for Sussan Ley, ending 9 months as the Liberal Party's first female leader. And what will she indicate here about why and how this happened and what her plans are now, and whether she is going to stick around in Parliament or leave, forcing a by-election in her seat of Farah. Let's have a listen in.
When I came to the leadership of the Liberal Party 9 months ago, my mother had just died. One of the things she said was, when something ends in sadness, don't dwell on the disappointment. Be grateful that you had it at all. So today, I want to express gratitude to the Liberal Party that I have belonged to and loved for more than half of my adult life. To the party room that elected me as their leader 9 months ago. And to the Parliament of Australia that has been the most extraordinary workplace for 25 years. The leadership of our party is a gift of the party room, and I respect the decision that they have made. For those who supported me today, I thank you. I thank you. Your loyalty, your unflinching loyalty, I will always appreciate. For those who did not, I genuinely have no hard feelings. I wish Angus Taylor well. I know he has experience, energy and drive. I know the whole team will have what it takes to fight this awful Labor government. I will be cheering them on. I thank the many colleagues that I have worked with, not just over the last few months, but over many years. You continue to have my respect and admiration for all that you do. I thank my deputy, Ted O'Brien, for the incredible way that he has conducted himself. I thank our grassroots party members who get up every day and work hard for the values that we all believe in so deeply. I have been supported by incredible staff in every Team Ley that I have led. Quite simply, I could not have done it without you. When a farmer from Rand in New South Wales, Angus McNeil, first approached me to be the candidate for Farah in 2001 and said he thought I had what it takes, I never expected to be successful. I won the seat by 206 votes and I have been re-elected 9 times. I love the Western Plains of New South Wales, the Murray and Murrumbidgee rivers and the rural communities that it has been my enormous privilege to represent. When I came here in 2001, my children were 8, 10 and 12. They are now in their 30s with children of their own. They are my greatest gift. And the 6 little Australians, my grandchildren, remind me that everything we do in this place should always be about the next generation. I leave it for others to judge this period of my leadership, now and with the passing of time. While I am sure plenty of people will have plenty to say, I have never sought to influence what other people think of me. I am proud of the role I played in establishing a Royal Commission into anti-Semitism. I am proud that we landed an energy policy in November last year, and I'm also proud that after a difficult period, the Coalition reformed stronger than before. There is no doubt that it has been a challenging time to lead the party after we suffered the worst defeat in 81 years. It has been tough, at times very tough, but every sleepless night, every intractable problem, indeed every personal challenge, has always been put in perspective by my understanding of the burdens that so many ordinary Australians face, quietly and without fuss, every day. Those Australians remain my inspiration. It is important that the new leader gets clear air, something that is not always afforded to leaders, but which in the present moment is more important than ever. I will be spending the next couple of weeks thanking the amazing people of Farah and expressing my gratitude to them for the honour of representing them for 25 years. Shortly thereafter, I will be tendering my resignation to the Speaker. I'm not sure what comes next for me. I look forward to stepping away completely and comprehensively from public life, to spend time with my family, to reconnect with my enduring passion, aviation, which taught me if I had an ego, I'd be dead. It's been quite useful in politics. And finally, as some of you know, I was part of the early punk rock movement in Canberra. I will continue to find wisdom in one of punk's defining themes, a fearless and honest belief in yourself. Thank you.
Sussan Ley announcing that she will be leaving Parliament after being defeated in the leadership ballot this morning. She's been the member for Farah for more than 20 years, as she explained, over 10 elections, but will spend a few weeks thanking the people of her electorate in Farah and then tendering her resignation to the Speaker as the local member. This will trigger a by-election and an early and difficult test for Angus Taylor as the new leader of the Liberal Party. It will be a test in which we expect quite a field of candidates: Liberal, National, Labor, One Nation, Independents. This will not be an easy test at all for Angus Taylor to face. But for Sussan Ley, we just saw there a very gracious exit. Not one bad word about Angus Taylor or any of the plotters, coup backers who moved against her. She defended her stint as leader, as short as it was, 9 months, listed off her role in establishing the Royal Commission into Anti-Semitism, landing an energy policy which was clearly very difficult, reforming the coalition, not once but twice. Not that she had a bad word either for the Nationals and its leader David Littleproud, despite the obvious difficulties we saw between the two. I want to immediately bring in Ted O'Brien, the now former Deputy Liberal leader, who's joined us immediately after this. We saw Sussan Ley thank you as well for your role as Deputy. Thank you so much for joining us, Ted O'Brien. And just briefly, firstly, your thoughts on that comment we've just heard there, remarks we've just heard there from Sussan Ley and her decision to leave Parliament.
Well, very sad to hear that she's going to be leaving Parliament, but can I say that I think what we saw from Sussan there is her greatest qualities. This has been a very tumultuous time for the Liberal Party, and she has displayed absolute dignity. She's been gracious throughout it all. A lot of tough challenges. I mean, politics is tough on the best of days, and the Liberal Party has had among the worst of its days, and she's been at the helm. That's not easy stuff. But I think what you saw in that presser just now is Sussan as herself. She was upbeat, she was positive, and I am sad though with her announcement that she'll be leaving.
Well, you're not going anywhere in terms of your...
I'm not planning on going anywhere, mate, but it's not always your choice though in politics, Dave.
No, but you're not resigning, but you did lose the deputy leadership ballot to Jane Hume, 30 votes to 20. Are you disappointed at that outcome?
I mean, of course, you always want a different outcome when you don't win, but you've got to genuinely trust the collective wisdom of the room, and I do. I mean, the great thing about the Liberal Party, yes, you've got all the tough stuff of politics, but everyone respects the democratic ballot. We respect each other and you respect the outcome. And that's ultimately because, more than anything, you respect the Australian people. I think Jane is going to do a superb job as deputy, and I'm actually really proud of her. And she'll certainly have my support and loyalty, as will Angus as the leader.
Do you expect to stay on as Shadow Treasurer, or is that a role that you expect to lose?
Oh, PK, I would like to stay on in that role. However, I also respect the fact it's really the decision of the leader, and I'll serve wherever the leader
Have you
decides
told Angus Taylor you'd like to stay on as Shadow Treasurer?
PK, you always ask the hard questions, but I don't ever disclose the personal conversations I have with colleagues.
Okay.
But since I've just told you, you could probably take it that one way or another he might.
You probably weren't just telling me, Ted O'Brien, because I can't make you Shadow Treasurer. I have another question, David, I'll throw to you in a second, but I just have to ask.
Sure.
Sussan Ley has now said she's going to quit the parliament. That means there's a by-election in her seat of Farah. Does that position need to be pre-selected, a woman be pre-selected for that role? Because if she goes, I think you're down to 5
in the reps.
In the reps, women, and that's embarrassing, isn't it?
Well, there's no doubt that we need more women representing the Liberal Party. You know, one of the things I'm most sad about, I think we had 29 fantastic female candidates at the last election who are not sitting in the parliament. They didn't win their seats. And that is a loss for us as a party, but it's also a big loss for the Australian people. And so while that would be nice, I'm also a creature of the Liberal Party, where each rank and file party member has franchise. And so it'll be up to the local members. I don't pretend to know who the best candidates might be.
No,
they will choose whether it be a male or female.
But you can't go backwards in terms of representation. What kind of look would that be?
Well, this is where you make the comments, PK. Ultimately, it's really up to the party members. They choose whoever is best on their merit. At the end of the day, that is why Sussan was first elected to that seat. It's why she was elected continually. It's why she was elected as our leader, and she served because of the merit that she presented.
This could also test once again, this by-election, the relationship between the Liberals and the Nationals. You're both entitled to stand when a member is leaving Parliament, and it's a vacant seat, if you will. Do you see this as being a test? Should the Nationals get out of the way, or do you welcome a contest?
Oh, look, we all love democracy. We'd be foolish to be in politics if we weren't up for a good contest of ideas. I'm sure there will be conversations between Angus and David Littleproud about how that might be managed. It's not for me to sort of preempt where that might land. Other than to say, of course, we are back with the National Party. That's a wonderful thing. Australia is best served by a strong coalition. And I think some of the messages that Angus delivered today in the party room were very strong. He is a coalitionist, and I'm confident with him at the helm that will continue to be the case.
Will we see a change in direction on economic policy under Angus Taylor?
Well, again, that's for Angus to speak about, David. But can I say?
But you must know. You must know.
Well, if you listen to what Angus said only, 2 days ago, or was it yesterday, when he was outlining his broader vision, he was talking about the importance of protecting Australians' way of life, but also improving their standard of living. It's very clear that he sees the economy at the centre. And I think as a classical Liberal, that is what is key.
But so did Sussan Ley and you, didn't you?
Indeed. But you're asking me as to whether or not Angus will prioritise. I believe he will present some change, but again, it's not for me, that's for Angus to bring forward. I'm sure he will.
You haven't spoken about that? You're not sure?
Again, I don't go into personal conversations, David. So I believe he is absolutely focused on ensuring that Australians who are getting poorer by the day under this government. Real wages are going backwards, prices have never been higher, and they are soaring, interest rates up. There is no doubt that Angus is absolutely focused on that, and he gets it. But few people understand
when
the
you
economy
stood next to Sussan Ley just 9 months ago as her deputy, and she talked about how she would lead the party, she used a form of language that I'm going to quote to you, that the party needed to basically move to the sensible centre. You've just elected a Conservative leader that wants to move into the values space. Is that the sensible centre?
Well, when, PK, you talk about the sensible centre, here's what I think the sensible centre is. It's basically the values that Australians consider to be their own values. I think those values are Liberal values. So you can talk about left and right and, centre. It is going back to what unites Australians, are the very values that unite the Liberal Party. And so, again, that is the freedom of the individual, the importance of the family, the importance of enterprise and entrepreneurship.
But how about on the notion that culture war issues, responsibilities? So a bigger focus on those. What's your reflections on that?
Again, now you go to specific areas of policy. Again, it'll be up to Angus to lay that out. But I have every confidence that he knows exactly where we're going to be going. He brings an enormous amount of experience, very deep intellect, and there's a reason why the collective wisdom of the room chose him to lead. And so,
do you agree was the smartest person in the shadow cabinet?
Oh, look, there's a lot of smart people in the shadow cabinet. I dare say our new leader is up there as the best of them.
OK, look, we're going to hear from Angus Taylor very shortly. We are going to let you go, but just finally,
sure.
clearly you wanted to stick with the existing leadership arrangements, Sussan Ley and yourself as deputy. But what do you think Australians should make of the change your party has made today?
Oh, look, I think Australia should know that we take one thing more seriously than anything, and that is saving them from a really bad government. There's been so much focus on us talking about ourselves as a Liberal Party. But in truth, it's not about saving the Liberal Party. It's about saving Australia, because Australians are getting poorer. But a prerequisite for that is to have a strong Liberal Party that will hold a very bad government to account and develop a positive plan for the future. We've seen the party make a big decision today that we need renewed, refreshed leadership, and it's under that leadership that we're looking forward to taking on those challenges moving ahead.
Ted O'Brien, we do appreciate you joining us
thanks,
after
David.
a very big morning
David.
for you and the Liberal Party. Thanks
Cheers.
so much
Thank
for
you.
that. And just a reminder, we are going to see Angus Taylor and Jane Hume front the cameras there very shortly. Jane Hume's down there. Jane Norman is down there.
Jane Hume will be there too soon.
Yeah, we just saw, we've just heard from Ted O'Brien. We saw Sussan Ley just a moment ago announcing that she will be going from Parliament. That triggers a by-election in her seat of Farah. Just look, tell us, I understand the staff, unsurprisingly, quite emotional in that moment.
Yeah, it was a really classy speech from Sussan Ley. Obviously, the big announcement here that she will be resigning from Parliament, triggering a by-election in Farah, which will be fascinating to watch. But she was very emotional, had tears in her eyes, but really, maintained her composure, and her staff around her also really crying. And at the end of her speech to the media, she didn't take any questions. She left, and as she was leaving, her staff were clapping behind her. I thought it was very interesting that she obviously was, defending her leadership and telling the media the things that she's proud of achieving, but she did make some subtle hints about, explaining why she's leaving Parliament to give her successor clear air, and she said something that not all leaders are afforded. That's about as far as she got to sort of, insinuating or suggesting that she hadn't really been given a fair go by her colleagues, just 9 months into her leadership being toppled in a very emphatic victory by Angus Taylor. So no questions there. I'm sure in coming days she might, expand on these thoughts, perhaps in some interviews with the media, but now she's preparing to leave Parliament after decades in this job.
Jane, look, thank you. We'll come back to you very shortly because we're minutes away from that press conference. But PK, I know you've got a lot to do as well.
I'm running to the press conference, David, because I would like to ask some questions.
Ask a question or two. I'll let you go.
It's hard asking questions when I'm with you, but I love your company. But can I say a historic day for the Liberal Party with such a thumping vote for Angus Taylor. This is a very new team, Angus Taylor and Jane Hume. It'll be interesting to see how they frame their vision for Australia. This is a very important press conference for them, which is why I want to go.
PK, go, run. You'll make it just in time. Thank you very much. We've done a few leadership spills together. PK.
We love spending time.
They're always fun. Mel Clark is back with us. Mel, at least this, we're talking about the size of the win for Angus Taylor, which helps him. Sussan Ley's departure from the Parliament, not that he would have necessarily wished this or anything, but it does help in these situations. How often have we seen, talking about previous leadership changes, the deposed leader and the focus on them sitting on the backbench, what's their expression, what are they saying, what are they doing, what are they going to do? That now is removed.
Sussan Ley will not be a miserable ghost. That is very clear. She is going to leave and has shown from that speech she will leave in a dignified way, perhaps befitting of her long service to the Parliament. It will be how clear the transition will be will also come down to how the party responds to the new front bench that Angus Taylor formulates. There are certainly a lot of bruised feelings behind the fine words we've heard from Sussan Ley and Ted O'Brien this morning. How Angus Taylor manages that is also going to be crucial as to how fresh this change is going to be. But if we look at the prospect of a by-election in Farah, this has the potential to open up some wounds with the Nationals. Now, we've had that relationship delicately repaired between David Littleproud and Sussan Ley just a short moment ago, but now we're going to see
just on that, Mel,
a three-corner contest.
Let me bring Casey Briggs back in. Perfect segue to our election analyst. Casey, you've got a by-election now to prepare for. We don't have a date for it yet, but Sussan Ley confirming that in 2 or 3 weeks she will formally tender her resignation, and that will trigger a by-election in Farah. Tell us about it.
Yeah, I'll just say, David, this is obviously a higher profile one. There actually are 2 other state and territory by-elections happening at the moment as well, and a state election. So it's a great time to be an election watcher at the moment. So yeah, Sussan Ley has been deposed as leader. She's seen the decisive win of Angus Taylor. That means her tenure as Liberal leader is the second shortest of any federal Liberal leader. She's beaten Alexander Downer in the 90s by about a few weeks. She's fallen short of Brendan Nelson by a couple of weeks, who was leader in 2007, and she's now leaving Parliament. So that is the end of her leadership. Can we just go back to 2001 when she entered Parliament? Farah was a seat held by Tim Fischer, the former Deputy Prime Minister, a National. When he retired, the Liberals and Nationals both contested that seat. Sussan Ley managed to top the first preference vote, beat the Nationals candidate, and despite Labor preferences flowing toward the Nationals, was able to hold on by, as she said in that brief statement, 206 votes, a very narrow win. Under the coalition agreement, once the rules are basically both parties can contest when there is a vacancy, but not when there is a sitting member held by a member of the coalition. So Sussan Ley did not really face all that much of a challenge after her first election in 2001. That means now, though, there being a vacancy, the Liberals and Nationals can both contest that election. Presumably they will. And as Mel was just saying, that could open up some tension between the relationship that we know is not the rockiest. It has been rocky in the last 9 months or so. There's also the potential for, other candidates to throw their hats in the ring. One Nation could make this a three-corner contest. I'll also just point out, in this seat, Labor did not perform particularly strongly in 2025. An independent ran second in Farah last year. So, there is potentially a world where an independent, she received about 20% of the first preference vote last year. There's a world where an independent could make a strong play as well, and they have a bit of time to mount a campaign, because Sussan Ley's indicated there she's not in a hurry to resign. She's going to take a few weeks, thank her supporters, thank her electorate before tendering that resignation. So that means a by-election is potentially a few months away still. There is a bit of a run-up there for candidates to get their horses in order.
Yeah,
Can I throw one more thing in, David, as well? Just that with a new leader of the Liberal Party, the coalition agreement, correct me if I'm wrong, will now need to also be renegotiated between Angus Taylor and David Littleproud. It was only renegotiated a few weeks ago, and I wonder if either side of that negotiation would seek to make any adjustments to the agreement that was made between Ley and Littleproud, whether that's another potential sore point. But a very interesting by-election potentially on the cards in Western New South Wales. I think both will contest it. The state seats that overlap Farah, well, one is held by a Liberal, the other is currently held by an independent, but without that independent there, that would be a national seat. So it's a very sort of interesting seat where you've got some urban areas, you've got some bush areas, and support for both parties.
No, it's a good point. Casey Briggs, thank you. And I'm going to have a bit more information on that in just a moment. But it's just gone 11 o'clock here in Canberra, where if you've just joined us, we've seen a change in the Liberal leadership this morning. 2 hours ago, MPs and senators from the Liberal Party assembled in their party room, and they voted emphatically to shift from Sussan Ley to Angus Taylor, 34 votes to 17. Angus Taylor, the Conservative 59-year-old, becomes the 17th leader of the Liberal Party. He doubled the vote of Sussan Ley in the end. So this was a big margin, a big win, and that will help him in terms of his authority within the room. Sussan Ley, we have just seen in the last half hour, announce with a gracious exit, thanking everybody, giving praise to Angus Taylor, not a bad word about anyone, but confirming that she will now be leaving Parliament, triggering this by-election in her seat of Farah. Here she was.
The leadership of our party is a gift of the party room, and I respect the decision that they have made. For those who supported me today, I thank you. I thank you. Your loyalty, your unflinching loyalty, I will always appreciate. For those who did not, I genuinely have no hard feelings. I wish Angus Taylor well. I know he has experience, energy and drive. I know the whole team will have what it takes to fight this awful Labor government. I will be cheering them on. It is important that the new leader gets clear air, something that is not always afforded to leaders, but which in the present moment is more important than ever. I will be spending the next couple of weeks thanking the amazing people of Farah and expressing my gratitude to them for the honour of representing them for 25 years. Shortly thereafter, I will be tendering my resignation to the Speaker.
Sussan Ley confirming there that she will be leaving Parliament after losing the Liberal leadership. We also just heard with us here on the ABC from Ted O'Brien, who's just lost the deputy leadership as well. Jane Hume has emerged as the winner of what was a wider field of candidates there, but ultimately when it came down to the two of them in a runoff, Jane Hume won 30 votes to Ted O'Brien's 20. Angus Taylor has just posted an image of himself with his new deputy, Jane Hume, in which he says, "It's an immense honour to be elected as leader of the Liberal Party. I'm looking forward to working with my deputy, Jane Hume, to serve the Australian people." So it's quite a comeback for Jane Hume, of course, was relegated to the backbench under Sussan Ley's leadership since the last election. She now is the deputy leader. We don't know what portfolio she will take. We've been discussing a bit about that over the last hour or so. Unlikely she will take the shadow treasurer's role. And being in the Senate, that's an added difficulty there. So whether it's Ted O'Brien remaining as shadow treasurer or a change to someone like Tim Wilson as shadow treasurer, we will see. Perhaps not today, but we will see an initial press conference from Angus Taylor and Jane Hume momentarily. Fiona Scott, the former Liberal MP and current federal vice president of the party, back with us again. We've been talking about the by-election in Farah that's now looming. And Casey Briggs speculating too about the number of candidates that will or won't be in the mix. There's time now, and this really fires the starter's gun on it. What Sussan Ley has just said, that she will be going. What's happening on the ground already in Farah, as far as you know?
Yeah, look, my understanding is the National Party are already ramping up, ready to go. I mean, obviously this adds a complexity to the conversation.
You reckon they were keeping an eye on...
Oh, well, my understanding is there have been call flutes up for a couple of weeks for a National Party candidate.
It's a bit presumptuous, isn't it?
Well, it also throws a different shade of light on the communications that Sussan's been dealing with David Littleproud in the background. If the Nats are campaigning in her seat and she's still the member and the leader of the party at the time.
I mean, this, people know the history of this, but Sussan Ley won the seat that had been held by the Nationals leader,
Tim Fischer,
for many, many years. Now, she's held it for many, many years, but it's that sort of seat, isn't it, that can go National or Liberal?
Well, yeah, and we've seen in New South Wales also the rise of things like the shooters parties and some of those aspects. And on that Victorian-New South Wales border, of course, Cathy McGowan won the seat of Indi, now held by Helen Haynes. So having that competitive contest of what you would consider more to the left in the Helen Hayne, Cathy McGowan model, and then to the right of somebody like the shooters, makes it a really interesting dynamic. The other really interesting dynamic between the two coalition partners here is you have the National Party who have a claim on it, being, Tim Fischer, a senior statesman of the foundations of the National Party. The Liberal Party was formed in Albury. So 1944, the foundation of the Liberal Party. Albury is a very important location because back in the day, obviously, it was halfway between Sydney and Melbourne, and that's why Menzies met there. So
there's historic roots in both parties.
For both parties. So
it really matters.
It really does matter. So it is going to be an interesting conversation.
What about independence? Because the grassroots voices of independence movement, they'd be eyeing off a seat like this.
My understanding is they've also got a candidate that they have been running around in the seat.
So everybody's been prepared for this by-election.
Yeah, game on for everybody. So, talk for days here on the ABC. But that's really, it is going to ramp up. It's going to be...
Will it need to be a woman that the Liberal Party pre-selects?
No, not necessarily. I think it needs to be the right person with the right community connectivity, and that will be a good candidate representing the people of Farah, would be my sense.
But Mel, as we were discussing earlier, if it's not a woman and they don't hold the seat either way, they're down to 5 women in the House of Reps.
This is a really awkward position for the Liberal Party now, where they know that there is a big challenge to win back female voters, particularly urban female voters. The party has made it very clear that moving to quotas is not something that has been accepted broadly across the party membership base. And they still have issues with party membership numbers, which have key roles in pre-selecting candidates and in official party structures. So this is the difficulty of the party not wanting to suggest that gender is the basis on which to select someone. But I don't think there's any doubt that part of Jane Hume's success as the deputy is a recognition that having axed the leader of Sussan Ley won't go down particularly well in the optics for the casual observer observer. Not everyone is looking very closely at the respective merits of Ted O'Brien versus Jane Hume as a deputy. They will see only simpler elements of that, and that's something, if you're to reach out to people who are only casually interested in politics, they need to be observant of. So it's going to be a factor, but it comes back to the fact that the Liberal Party hasn't really reconciled with some of these key issues, like how to engage more women in their political party and their policy aspects that the party still has to reconcile with. Beyond that, changing Angus Taylor at the leadership doesn't help reconcile with some of the differences within the party around energy policy, differences around how to approach some immigration issues and how to characterise them. These are unsettled too. So I think the issue of gender and pre-selection in the by-election of Farah is just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg of some of the chasms we still see in the Liberal Party that need to be dealt with.
Annabelle Crabb, let me bring you in here because just thinking this through now, in the Senate, the leadership team, Michaelia Cash would still be the Senate leader for the Liberals. Jane Hume is the deputy leader of the party, but not the Senate leader. I think this happened actually in the Nationals with Perrin Davey and Bridget McKenzie for a period. But anyway, they do have women in their leadership group is the point, just not the top person. But in the Senate, you have that interesting dynamic where Michaelia Cash will be Senate leader, Jane Hume, party deputy leader. So I'm not sure who's got the authority there. Yeah,
I'm not quite sure how that works either. And if you go across the leadership group of the Liberal Party, i.e. the leader and deputy leader, you have a domination in the Senate and a domination of women. In the Senate at the moment, you have Michaelia Cash as the chamber leader, and her deputy is Anne Ruston. I think sometimes that's quite a tricky relationship. They're factionally very different. And now you've got Jane Hume in the mix as deputy leader of the party overall. It's super unusual for a deputy leader of the Liberal Party to be from the Senate. I think there's only one instance of this occurring in history, and that's Fred Chaney, who was deputy leader to Andrew Peacock for about 300 days, not quite a year, in 1989. So
come on, you had to Google that, Annabelle. Come on.
I did have to Google it. Hey, there's no shame in looking things up.
Not at all,
David. But
so
it is unusual.
It's been a while, is the point.
Yeah, it has, and I guess it'll be interesting to see how that works sort of strategically. Angus Taylor is obviously a new opposition leader. He hasn't sat in that desk. He hasn't been responsible for strategy and question time. It is normal for the deputy leader to be there in the chamber, keeping an eye on people, talking to people. He won't have that because Jane Hume will be in the red room of intrigue. So who's his Praetorian Guard kind of downstairs in the House of Reps? And here the choice of Shadow Treasurer is going to be pretty interesting too, because I can tell you there's only one candidate for that job that the Labor Party's super worried about, and that's Tim Wilson.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, look, you know, Tim Wilson has the runs on the board with the franking credits campaign. He ran against Labor when Bill Shorten was leader. Just, Annabelle, look at the photo here of, I mentioned this, Angus Taylor posted this just in the last few minutes. Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, the leader and deputy. First image that they've posted from their office, big smiles as well, and we're going to see them front the cameras. Well, it was meant to be 10 minutes ago, but soon, I'm sure. Annabelle, I'm sure we will see plenty of them together, throughout their leadership.
No doubt. And I think, I don't know, waiting for Angus Taylor has been a bit of a lengthy affair over the last little while, right? I mean, I don't know. How many ideas do you have to make conversation, David? I have plenty of ideas.
Look, we've been going for 2 hours and we got a lot to go through yet. Stick with us. All right, Annabelle, we'll come back to you. Mel?
I think on this point of how Angus Taylor is going to manage Parliament now with a new group, we should also be considering who is going to be the manager of government business in the House of Representatives. It's a role that has been held by Alex Hawke, who was a key factional supporter and a key ally and a key numbers person for Sussan Ley.
Does he hold on to that job?
It's hard to see him holding on to that job. job, but there's going to be a lot of shuffling going around, so I'm certainly not putting any money down on it. But that role is critical to how a leader executes their strategy in the House, and you need to have 100% trust in that person. And it's hard to see how someone who was Sussan Ley's numbers person is going to hold that critical role in an Angus Taylor-led Liberal Party. So what I would expect is that we would see a change in terms of who runs that, and that will help. That will be critical in the strategy in question time, in which pieces of legislation to prioritise, in how you negotiate with the government and other crossbenchers. So that is going to be a really critical appointment that won't get as much attention as a treasurer, but will be critical for Angus Taylor's
They're a really
success.
important role, and you're right, they're always given to a trusted hand. Tony Burke is close with Anthony Albanese, one of their most experienced and senior people. Anthony Albanese himself held
was
that role.
critical in that role.
Exactly. Look, Fiona Scott, before we say goodbye to you this morning as well, I keep coming back to this zoom out question. For those who are watching this, perhaps not following politics intimately and wondering who's going to be the manager of opposition business, for example, what should Australians be taking out of this moment? What we've seen the Liberal Party do today at a very, very low ebb, how should this be interpreted?
Look, I hope this is the rock bottom of the Liberal Party, and from here, this is where the Liberal Party builds back together. Angus Taylor and Jane Hume will very much look at an economic agenda. That will be very important to them. But then they'll also have to ensure they keep elements of the nationalist right of the Liberal Party, the more Trump-inspired people, where they're going to be focusing on things like the immigration policies and things like that. The opportunity for Angus and Jane is how they can, we're talking about Farah and the foundation of the Liberal Party, how they can bring the party back together, but how they can also reach across, like Menzies did, to what is that whole centrist and centre-right movement of Australian politics. That is their mission, that is their Herculean task, and hopefully when they face the cameras, that's what we're going to hear.
All right, big moment for them, no doubt. Fiona Scott, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll catch up soon. But yes, that is the big task ahead of them, Mel, is trying to at least begin on the right setting, to begin that Herculean task, as Fiona calls it.
It certainly is, and there are a couple of difficulties here for Angus Taylor and Jane Hume. They might well get an initial bounce in support by mere fact of having settled some of the drama that has been encompassing Australian politics because of this in recent weeks and indeed in recent months. But in this point in the electoral cycle, there's not a strong amount of engagement from many voters in what is going on in politics. It's a time when we do see voters more willing to consider the idea of giving their support to a minor party, and One Nation's rise is certainly an example of that, but so is the level of support for the other category in polling, the independents, the micro parties that come along. So can Angus Taylor, one, craft a message and policies that attract voters, and two, are they going to pay any attention at this point? And if they aren't paying attention and there isn't a recovery in the polls, do his colleagues have patience for that? Sussan Ley was given a short time. Angus Taylor isn't going to get forever either. So there's a lot of different pressures for him to deal with.
There sure are. Let's just bring up, if we can, the shot there from the courtyard. And Jane Norman's just been, I think, trying to track down what we can expect. Thank you for sticking with us, but we're just trying to track down when we can expect to see Angus Taylor and Jane Hume front the cameras there to begin this task of explaining why the Liberal Party has had to make this change today and where they want to take the party from here. The direction, clearly it will be trying to appeal to both ends of the spectrum where the Liberals have lost so much support. But how they do that and what that means in a policy sense will be the difficulty. And now we know there's a by-election looming with Sussan Ley leaving Parliament, forcing a by-election at some point in the first half of this year in her seat of Farah that she's held for more than 20 years and previously held by the Nationals, Tim Fischer. So Patricia Karvelas has been, well, raced down there to catch this press conference, but is back here with us in the studio. What happened?
Nothing happened. So there was a bit of a false alarm and a lot of excitement that the press conference was just about to begin. It will happen soon, we've been told, but it's likely now to be in the opposition party room, which you would expect.
A more formal setting.
I thought it was a little unusual to have it in the courtyard. That's likely to be announced imminently. But what I can tell you is that Angus Taylor's office door is still closed, and I know there's a lot to be read into that, but clearly, just to tell people how the sausage is made, after a big win like this, they would now be rehearsing what he says when he comes out and stands at the lectern. It's a key moment for him. It's also a key moment for sending a message, and I've been told this from a few Conservatives, to their base. Don't forget that some of the support the Liberal Party has been losing are from their own supporters. And so for Angus Taylor, this is not only going to be a pitch to Middle Australia, which is of course key, it will also be a pitch to that right-wing voting group that has been moving away and has been legitimising and normalising One Nation, particularly since Barnaby Joyce joined, which has given an alternative to them. So rehearsing the lines with Jane Hume about how they'll handle certain questions.
Right.
One of the questions they'll be asked, I can tell you, either me or someone else, when I do finally go down,
is... flag your question.
Yeah, I will. If you're watching, guys, no, in all seriousness, I think on the economic question, they have been hammered for putting forward an economic vision at the last election which does not match Liberal values. You know, it was higher taxes, not lower taxes. So it'll be a key moment where they have to differentiate and really probably say that was the wrong direction.
We will see that happen at some point soon. But fortunately, while we wait, we've got some terrific guests, and one of them is the former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who joins us now. Thank you very much for joining us. How do you react to what your party has done today in moving from Sussan Ley to Angus Taylor?
Well, I think it was highly likely once the polls had got to the situation they were in. So it's tough on Sussan, but and she hasn't had very long to prove herself. But you know, politics is governed by the iron laws of arithmetic, as John Howard always used to say.
Is Angus Taylor the answer, though, to the Liberal Party's current set of problems?
No, he's absolutely not. No leader is. What they really need to do is move back to the centre. They've got to start talking about the economy and talking about it not just in bland, you know, motherhood statements, lower taxes, you know, less government, all that stuff. They've got to actually have some plans. They've got to demonstrate that they're serious people and that they're thinking about the changes that can be made to make the Australian economy grow faster and to be fairer. They've got to have positive, detailed plans to promote housing affordability. They've got to have detailed plans about tax reform. They can't just get away with sound bites that may go down well on Sky News, which, you know, as Patricia's been saying, is where a lot of their branch members live, because that is not real Australia. At least it's not middle Australia.
So when you talk about detailed plans, often we're told, look, it's just too hard from opposition to do that sort of hard work and detailed work. It's going to get picked apart by the government and all the machinery the government has at its disposal. You're saying, no, in opposition, they're really going, and the point that the Liberal Party is currently facing, this very, very low ebb, they're going to have to do that detailed work. They're going to have to put out, even early in this term, we're still a couple of years away from when the election's due, that sort of detailed policy to turn things around.
Yes, I think they do, because they've got to regain their credibility on the economy. You see, during the Morrison government, the spendathon there, you know, shook a lot of people's confidence. The extravagance of it shook a lot of people's confidence in the Liberals' economic management. The, you know, Dutton's term as opposition leader did even more damage to that. You know, like crazy things like saying the government's going to build, 8 or 9 nuclear power stations around the country. You know, there was literally nobody in the energy sector that thought that was a good idea, not one person. So, you know, if you're the Liberal Party and you've got business reform, tax reform, you know, efficiency reforms that you want to propose, you've got to be able to get some backers from the business community, you've got to have some third-party endorsements, and they lack that. So they've got to stop living in this right-wing populist bubble, which is where they've been and which has been so catastrophic for them, and get back and sound like serious business people wanting to get a better outcome for Australia. Now,
What about the cultural stuff, though? Whether it's, you know, using an Indigenous flag or an Australian flag or both or not, whether it's the welcomes to country, whether it's some of the elements around the immigration debate. I mean, clearly some elements have an economic aspect to them, but some of the issues around values and so on. Would Conservatives argue it's important that we win back those who've drifted to One Nation by talking about these things? Do you accept that, or do you think that's folly?
I think it is. I think it's not a black or white issue, right? But if you think you are going to win back people who have gone to Hanson by showing yourself to be even more tough or anti-immigration than her, that's a game you can't win. So you see, they've got to get out of that bubble. They're trapped at the moment. I mean, Sky News and the Murdoch media have been the best thing that has ever happened to the Labor Party, because they've dragged the Liberal Party off to the right. I mean, this was the battle I always had when I was Prime Minister. As you remember, David, my problems were not really with the Labor Party, but it was with people like Angus Taylor and Tony Abbott and their friends in the media, who were Dutton and co, these guys have got control of the Liberal Party, absolutely. They had control over Dutton, they burnt it to the ground. They've now got their man in again with Angus Taylor. Will they do even more damage? There's not a lot left to burn. But, you know, the problem is that, unfortunately, the people that are backing Angus, particularly in the media, they want him, and you can hear this, you've been talking about it, they want to go off and go further to the right and show that they're even more right-wing and populist and, you know, anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalism, anti-Aboriginals, you know, all of those things, than Pauline Hanson. Well, that's a battle you can't win.
So Malcolm Turnbull,
start talking about the economy.
So Malcolm Turnbull, I mean, that's an interesting point you make. Andrew Hastie early on was, of course, putting himself forward. He withdrew. The Conservatives threw their support behind Angus Taylor, and so he withdrew. He would have been a very different choice right now. Is Angus Taylor right for the times? Even if you're going down that road of appealing to that One Nation vote, is he the one that would even do that?
Well, I mean, Angus, if that's the direction Angus is going to take, that will just condemn the Liberal Party to further irrelevance. I mean, the curious thing about a lot of people say about Angus Taylor is he is the best qualified idiot they've ever met. I mean, this is a tough thing to say, but that what they're saying is this guy's got all these degrees, he's got all of these qualifications, he's a Rhodes Scholar, mind you, they're a dime a dozen. Look at me and Tony Abbott. But the bottom line is that he has not delivered the sort of the positive policy agendas, the real achievements in government that you'd expect from somebody with those qualifications. I mean, he ensured the coalition went to the last election, allowing the Labor Party to say, honestly, vote Labor for lower taxes. Honestly, to say that. This wasn't rhetoric, it was the absolute truth. Now, that's why people like me and Costello and others who'd, you know, been fairly experienced in politics were reeling and saying, my God, what madness is this? And so you know, Angus, the thing that there's this mismatch, this hugely qualified resume on the one hand, and then when you look at what he's actually done in politics, so far it's been very disappointing. Now, look, who knows? He could, as I said, there's always people get second and third chances. You know, maybe he'll do a blinder as opposition leader, but he's got to get out of that right-wing bubble and he's got to focus on the real needs of Australia. The problem at the moment is there's only one major party that is operating in the centre of Australian politics, and that's the Australian Labor Party. And
Malcolm Turnbull, it's Melissa Clark here. I just want to press you on this idea of not playing to the right-wing bubble and the base, but you yourself and subsequent Liberal Party leaders, Scott Morrison, Peter Dutton, Sussan Ley and now Angus Taylor, have to deal with the fact that in the party room sit people of very different political ideas, and the difficulty of saying, I want to take the party in this direction. You still have to manage that tension that is within the party itself. That was a difficulty for you, a difficulty for successors. How can Angus Taylor succeed in doing that when his predecessors haven't?
Well, he has the advantage of being tribally one of them. So that's an advantage. But he's still got to move back to the centre, because you know, if all you're doing is winning the approval and adulation of, you know, Sky News and the right-wing commentariat, then you cannot win in our, Australian democracy. I mean, this is not just me saying this. I mean, Paul Kelly, you know, one of the most distinguished political commentators and historians in our country, writing in The Australian, which is part of that right-wing media bubble, has made exactly that point.
Sure, but it's not just Angus Taylor that needs to do that. You need to have the other party members who are in the parliamentary party accept that.
Melissa, you're absolutely right, and that is why a lot of people think the Liberal Party is cooked. There's a lot of people think the Liberal Party is incapable of revival because its membership, both in the Parliament and in the branches, is so old, so right-wing, so, living in a parallel universe. I mean, look at Alex Antic on the 7:30 report last night. Clearly he idolises Pauline Hanson and doesn't make any bones about it. Well, the craziness of this. I mean, just think about Antic for a minute. He basically has control of the South Australian Liberal Party, very right-wing guy. South Australia is one of the most small L Liberal jurisdictions in Australia. It, ACT and Victoria would be the three most small L Liberal. And the Liberal Party is in the hands of the far right. And no wonder they are facing electoral wipeout at the state election.
So to that end, Malcolm Turnbull, there's been, as you well know, plenty of chatter about is now the time for a new party to emerge that would incorporate some of those teal independents and disaffected Liberals and so on. Is this the moment? If Angus Taylor doesn't somehow, provide this recovery that the Liberals might hope he will, is now the moment for a new party to emerge? And are you involved in any way in talks about that sort of move?
Well, I talk about politics all the time, so I'm always talking about this, and I've been raising this issue for quite a while. But no, I'm not about to set up a new party, and I'm not aware of anyone about to set up a new party. But I think there is this yawn. Look, if you believe the middle ground, the centre is where contestation in Australian politics should occur, the centre right, what used to be called the centre right, is no longer there. I mean, this is you can say many things about Anthony Albanese. He must be the luckiest Prime Minister ever, because he's made quite a bit of his own luck. I give him a lot of credit for that. But his opponents have just blown themselves up again and again to the point where they're really questioning whether the Liberal Party, which had been the most successful party in Australian political history, is about to go into oblivion. And, if Angus Taylor's answer to solving that is to head back to try to recapture those One Nation votes that are, watching Sky News in the regions or whatever, that will just make it even less likely that they can be competitive at the centre. And unless they can do that, they're not a viable contender as an alternative government.
So does someone need to step in with a centre-right party, a new party?
Well, I think that the goal is open. But yes, the goal is open for someone to step up and do it. I think there is an opportunity there, but whether it will be taken, starting new parties, pulling old parties, busted parties together like Menzies did in the 40s, is very challenging. And you need a special type of leadership to do that. But I think there is a gap there. I mean, there are the idea that the Liberal Party is effectively inching closer to Pauline Hanson, and you've got Liberal Party figures like Antic, they're praising Pauline Hanson, and you've now got the right-wing media kind of rehabilitating Hanson. I mean, she is becoming, the darling of the Murdoch media. I mean, this is wild stuff, and so it's as though they want the Labor Party to be in government forever.
Malcolm Turnbull, former Prime Minister, former Liberal leader, of course. We appreciate your thoughts on this day of change for the Liberal Party. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much.
All right, so PK, Malcolm Turnbull, unsurprisingly, is very worried about the direction the party's already drifted in. The goal is open, he said, for a new party to emerge. I think his reluctance to be involved in any such move is perhaps understandable, but this has been talked about really for a long time, really since the Teals emerged.
Yeah.
But
the answer is the Teals, though. This is the issue. A new party would be very difficult to establish, whereas the Teals have taken that space. So what you can expect, if the Liberal Party continues to fail to appeal to metropolitan voters, which has been the story, not just the inner city, but a wider group of voters, city voters, is that the sort of teal or independent movement will continue to grow. That's the truth. That's the role they play on the sort of progressive, small L Liberal side. So it's already existing. I just want to say on that, the moderates inside the Liberal Party will not abandon the Liberal brand. The brand itself has value. It has money. It has, they want to win the brand. They keep losing. Numerically, they are clearly struggling. That's why Sussan Ley's grip on the leadership was very tenuous. But ultimately, they're not going anywhere. I mean, I've spoken to key moderates. They say, we're not going anywhere. We're not abandoning this ship. They want to start controlling the narrative of that ship. So watch that space. I know that Jane Hume is seen increasingly by the moderates because of her relationship with Angus Taylor as perhaps not fully one of them. But I mentioned earlier, we've been rolling for hours, so lots of viewers wouldn't have heard, I'll repeat it. Jane Hume fought very hard in the net zero campaign that they had, or the question mark that they reconsidered the net zero by 2050. That's the climate change question. For that policy to stay, right? So she is a moderate. She understands Victoria. She'll be very instrumental in campaigning at the Victorian state election, which is at the end of this year, where also One Nation will be tested, can I say, before, after the South Australian election. And she is a moderate. So she is also in Angus Taylor's ear. And I think she'll play a moderating voice in terms of things that work in the cities. I think that's right. Forcing a more, liberal, small L Liberal agenda.
Look, Mel, when Malcolm Turnbull there talks about, and that was really interesting, the need for detailed policies now from this new opposition leadership team. Yes, we're always told, an opposition will wait too much close to the election and we can't do big, bold things because you can only do that in government. Turnbull is saying the opposite. They've got to take their risks right now and do some of this. What do you think? Is that what we're likely to see?
I think we do need to see clear policy. I don't think we need details of, I think this tax should be at this tax bracket and it should be phased down at this rate. I don't think we need that level of detail, but we do need a much clearer idea of what a Liberal Party would deliver for the country. I was really interested when Ted O'Brien sat here after Sussan Ley's speech. He's tried to talk about the need to focus on key issues that resonate with Australians, and then he said, I wrote this down because it really struck me, he said, we take one thing really seriously, that is saving Australia from a bad government. That's a negative characterisation rather than offering anything to a voter. It doesn't actually give any indication of what you stand for. It just says we are not this mob. And that's a strange approach to take when the Labor Party has just had a historically high election victory. It seems most Australians aren't rejecting what is being offered. So simply saying we are not them is not going to cut it. They have to offer something that is positive and clear. And even if it's not to the point of detail that I think Malcolm Turnbull might like, it does need to be more than the motherhood statements of we want a better economy, we want less debt, we care about families. I think most people want those things. How are they going to differ from Labor? Yeah, that's what needs to be articulated.
They are motherhood statements. When you talk constantly just of values, you're not really putting much meat on the bone. They're broad concepts. And often Liberals do this because they're trying to find a way of philosophically sounding link to the moderates, because increasingly there is this division. But I've heard from senior Liberals saying we're in a situation now where we're trying to be a party that appeals to voters that want to vote teal and appeals to voters that want to vote One Nation. Now, teal and One Nation voters are very different.
Very different.
And so that is a very difficult task.
Look, it really is. And while they work out whether to put forward their own detailed or otherwise policy ideas, Labor will keep bowling up tests for them. Just this week, they introduced the superannuation tax changes that were watered down, but that's a test. The coalition will vote against that one, but the next one coming seems to be capital gains tax reform. And again, that will be a test. Do they want to say something to those younger voters locked out of the housing market that we hear you, we're going to do something about capital gains tax? Or do they instinctively say, no, lower taxes is our thing and we're going to oppose this? So it's another test. They will keep coming from Labor. All right, we're going to check in now with Jane Norman, who's been patiently waiting and trying to find out what's going on with this press conference. Well, Jane, tell us, when can we expect to see Angus Taylor and Jane Hume, and where can we expect to see them?
Well, that's a great question, Spearsy. I've walked past Angus Taylor's office. The door is closed. I've spoken to both sides, both Jane Hume and Angus Taylor's advisors, and they are saying possibly in the next hour to an hour and a half. So things are obviously pretty fluid. As you have mentioned, this is a very big statement that the pair of them will be making to start laying down some foundations about how they intend to turn the Liberal Party's dire fortunes around. So we'll obviously bring that to you, but it's not looking like it's for another sort of 60 to 90 minutes at this stage.
All right, well, it's still going to be a long day ahead. Jane Norman, thank you very much. Annabelle Crabb's been watching on as well. And Annabelle, listening to Malcolm Turnbull there, I mean, Angus Taylor as the new leader will be getting plenty of free advice. What do you think he'll make of that?
I do have views on this, but I just want to point out that, like, waiting for Angus Taylor is absolutely becoming a thing. And, I mean, he is now probably the second most famous Taylor to be just constantly and famously late. The great Elizabeth Taylor, of course, famously was late to her own funeral by her own direction. She was the most chronically late person ever, and so she directed that her funeral should start 15 minutes later than advertised because she didn't want to let her own reputation down. So we're here for another 90 minutes, possibly more, who knows. Anyway, your question was about Malcolm Turnbull, yes?
Yes, and how that's likely to be received, that sort of suggestion and advice by Angus Taylor.
Well, I think I would imagine that Angus Taylor stopped accepting advice from Malcolm Turnbull some time ago. Obviously, the most coincident spheres of interest of those two gentlemen has been around energy policy. Angus Taylor obviously was an architect as Scott Morrison's energy minister of the net zero deal with the National Party that involved a sort of great regional fund and all sorts of other concessions to Barnaby Joyce's demands that kind of ended up nowhere. And I would say that Angus Taylor, although probably doesn't really say it on the tin, was quite involved in the frustration of Malcolm Turnbull's national energy guarantee back when Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister. So I don't think that Angus Taylor, who's obviously locked in his office accepting advice from all sorts of people about exactly what he's going to say now that he's won this leadership that he's been angling for quite some time. I don't know that he'll be having Malcolm Turnbull on the speed dial, but I mean, that central difficulty that the party has is the number one issue. You know, they're losing support to One Nation. They are struggling to win back those strongholds in the metropolitan centres of Australia. They have a generational issue where younger voters are turning away from them. What do you do in order to bring those groups together? Because there are Venn diagrams that don't really cross over. And I think that the answer here, if there is one for this party to save it from complete oblivion, and it's not an exaggeration to say that there are people talking about, you know, setting up new parties and so on, is the answer that has always been apparent from Australian politics, which is, in order for the Liberal Party to prosper from here on in, I think you're going to need the government to fall into a massive hole. What we've heard over the last week or two is the more intense the internal arguments become in the Liberal Party and the more they argue and talk about themselves, they have dialed up their rhetoric about how dreadful and awful and unsurvivable this government is. If what happens this year is that the government gets ahead of steam and overreaches or does something over-ambitious or overconfident, I mean, that is the most likely
100%.
Gathering point for what remains of the Liberal Party to come together. And as we were talking a minute ago about the choice of portfolio holders, it'll be interesting to see who Angus Taylor goes for as Shadow Treasurer, because it sounds like we've got a big budget coming up and that's an opportunity for the Liberal Party.
Annabelle, thank you so much for all of your analysis and input over the last several hours. We're going to let you go as we wait for Angus, as you put it. We'll talk again.
The smartest woman in my cabinet, Annabelle Crabb.
That's exactly right. Look, well, let's get some quick, I won't say final thoughts, because no doubt we'll be back here once we do get to this press conference, but I think we are going to leave things and check in on some other news in a moment. But Mel, just where we're at right now, we, obviously have gone through a lot of the challenges that Angus Taylor and Jane Hume will face. But again, if we pull out a little bit and just look at what the Liberal Party's done today, yes, it became clear yesterday this is where they were heading. They've ended up with an emphatic vote in favour of Angus Taylor.
So what we need to see now is how Angus Taylor presents the change that he is making at the helm, what that will look like in terms of policy, what that might mean for party issues, that stuff that goes on in the background but nonetheless needs to be dealt with. The first of that will be his shadow frontbench, and that is going to be crucial to trying to provide stability and buy-in from across the different groups. That we've seen very fractured groupings within the Liberal Party throughout this process. The Conservatives have been fractured, the moderates have not been acting as a bloc. If he is to try and quell all of the disappointments and frustrations that we've seen, we can look at the size of his victory and say that does give him a level of authority in the party, but we can perhaps also look at it as a sign of desperation in the party. Yes. They know how difficult and existential the crisis is that is facing them. He can't assume that the scale of his victory today is representative of support for him personally. It's a recognition of the direness of the position that we're in now. His first steps will be crucial in trying to give some comfort to those Liberals that there are better days ahead.
All right, Mel, thank you. And PK, I mean, yes, this is a big moment, big test for Angus Taylor. I think it is fair to say that we haven't really heard in the weeks and days leading up to this much of a plan from him. Broad priorities about restoring the way of life, lifting standards of living. Dan Tehan told us at this desk in the last couple of hours that there is a manifesto, was his word. I'm not sure how detailed that will be, but clearly, given where they're at, there is an enormous amount of work to be done and some risks that need to be taken.
I think there is a lot of pressure now on Angus Taylor to walk a very fine line of representing kind of harder, more right-wing values type issues, which is something, for instance, that his rival on the right, Andrew Hastie, was pushing for, that sort of approach. But at the same time, his biggest thing will have to be proving his economic bona fides. Like, that's actually the biggest task for him, to prove that he is of that tradition and that he can deliver. It's an enormous amount of pressure. I think it's interesting that he hasn't been playing his leadership contest out in the public. No. Now, of course, in the media, we find that, well, I do find it frustrating. Sure. I prefer to have an interview and cross-examine. Although I will say this, to give Angus Taylor some credit about the way he's played this, I think he's actually played a blinder. He has not been given enough credit. He's been seen as incompetently organising this. He's just won a landslide in the party room. All of the heavy lifting in the background was done by his rival, Andrew Hastie, who really set the scene for a challenge. He swooped in after being in Europe. He wasn't around for the Bondi, so his hands were clean on the sort of hate speech laws. And then he was able to provide the party the comfort that he could be that stable pair of hands and rebuild slowly. He hasn't promised any miracles to anyone. So I actually think, don't underestimate the guy, because he's just come through the middle in many ways, and he has seized the leadership, and he's got some moderates who voted for him. I mean, that's why Sussan Ley didn't end up doing very well in the spill, and then ultimately, of course, the vote, and why there'll be a by-election. One more thing I want to mention, just got an alert, and it's an alert worth mentioning. It's an alert from Pauline Hanson, the greatest now rival on the right to the Liberal Party. She's going to have a press conference at 2 o'clock Queensland time to talk about, guess what, the Farah by-election, the Lib spill, because she is acting like the real opposition to the opposition. They're fighting for votes on the right, and it'll be interesting to see how she frames it.
And One Nation will be running very seriously in this by-election that's coming in Farah. PK, thank you. And look, this by-election in Farah, with Sussan Ley's departure from the Parliament, as she announced just about an hour ago, having lost the leadership, really does set that very first and early test for Angus Taylor, and it will not be an easy one, with a broad field, including One Nation, Independents, National Party, Liberal Party, Labor. This is going to be a fascinating by-election to watch. So as we await that Angus Taylor press conference, we're going to wrap things up from here for now. We'll come back when we do hear the new Liberal leader emerge. Just to repeat, he's won big this morning, 34 votes to Sussan Ley's 17, change in the deputy as well from Ted O'Brien to Jane Hume. We will hear from the new leadership team soon at some point as to where to from here. So stay with us on the news channel. We'll be back with some updates and all of those events as they unfold. And also tune in to 7:30 tonight. There will be special coverage, 7:30 this evening, on the leadership spill and Sussan Ley's resignation. But for now, we're going to hand back to Roz in the news studio.